Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Robert Mitchell had built his empire with calloused hands and an iron will. At 45, he owned the largest construction company in the tri-state area, Mitchell & Sons, employing over 300 workers. His reputation was legendary, fair but ruthless, loyal to those who earned it, and merciless to those who crossed him. Rob had clawed his way up from nothing, working 16-hour days since he was 16, sleeping in his truck between jobs when he couldn't afford rent. The two-story colonial house in Westfield represented everything he'd fought for. Linda, his wife of 18 years, had transformed it into something from a magazine spread. Their son Danny, now 15, had everything Rob never had: private school, college fund, a future handed to him on a silver platter. Rob stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror that Tuesday morning, noting the gray threading through his dark hair. The scars on his knuckles told stories of bar fights and construction accident from his younger days. He'd married Linda when she was 22 and he was 27, a beautiful waitress with dreams bigger than her small hometown could contain. He'd given her those dreams, shaped them into reality with his bare hands. "Coffee's ready," Linda called from downstairs, her voice carrying that warm tone that had first captured his heart at Murphy's Diner all those years ago. Rob found her in the kitchen, still stunning at 40. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and she wore the silk robe he'd bought her for their anniversary. She smiled, that same smile that had made him believe a roughneck like him could deserve something beautiful. "Early meeting today?" she asked, pouring coffee into his thermos. "Site inspection at the Riverside project. Foundation pour tomorrow if the weather holds." Rob kissed her cheek, breathing in her familiar perfume. "Danny's still asleep? You know teenagers. I'll drive him to school when he surfaces." Rob grabbed his hard hat from the counter. "Dinner at 7? Always." Linda's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief Rob almost missed it. He'd been missing a lot lately, he realized. Late nights at the office, weekend site visits, conference calls that stretched past midnight. Building an empire demanded sacrifice, but lately, he wondered if he'd sacrificed too much. The Riverside project was his masterpiece, a luxury residential complex that would cement Mitchell & Sons' reputation for decades. Every detail mattered. Every decision carried weight. As Rob walked the construction site, pointing out adjustments to his foreman, he felt the familiar satisfaction of creation, of building something permanent in a world full of temporary things. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Having lunch with Cheryl today. Home by 4. Love you." Cheryl Brennan, Linda's college friend who'd moved to town 6 months ago. Recently divorced, always dramatic, the type who seemed to collect other people's problems. Rob had never warmed to her, but Linda needed friends. Being married to a man who worked 70 hours a week couldn't be easy. That evening, Rob arrived home to find Linda humming in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread. She seemed unusually cheerful, almost glowing. "Good day," he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Wonderful. Cheryl and I went to that new spa downtown. Very relaxing." Linda leaned into him, but something felt different. Her posture was too perfect, her voice too bright. Danny appeared in the doorway, earbuds dangling around his neck. "Hey, Dad. How was work?" "Same as always, son." "How was school?" "Fine." Danny's response was clipped, and he avoided eye contact. Teenage attitude, Rob assumed, though something nagged at him. They ate dinner in relative quiet, Linda chattering about her day while Danny pushed food around his plate. Rob watched his family, noting subtle changes he couldn't quite identify. The way Linda's laugh sounded forced. How Danny kept glancing at his phone. Small things that probably meant nothing. After dinner, Rob retreated to his home office to review blueprints for the next day's pour. Construction was predictable. Follow the plans, use quality materials, maintain safety standards, and everything turned out solid. Unlike people, buildings didn't lie or change their nature overnight. Around 11, Rob headed upstairs to find Linda already in bed, reading one of her romance novels. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Then she smiled, and he decided he was imagining things. Long day, she said, marking her place in the book. They're all long days. Rob sat on the bed's edge, removing his work boots. But worth it, are they? Linda's question caught him off guard. Rob studied her face. What do you mean? Nothing. Just, sometimes I wonder if you're happy, Rob. Really happy. It was an odd question from a woman who lived in a house he'd bought, drove a car he'd paid for, wore jewelry he'd worked overtime to afford. But Rob had learned that women thought differently about such things. I'm happy when my family's safe and provided for. When I know you and Danny have everything you need. Linda nodded, but her smile seemed sad. I know you work hard for us. I hope you know how much that means to me. The conversation felt weighted with subtext he couldn't decipher. Rob kissed her goodnight and settled into bed, but sleep came slowly. Something was shifting in his perfect life, like the first crack in a foundation that seemed solid but was slowly giving way to hidden pressures. In the darkness, Linda lay beside him, her breathing too careful to be genuine sleep. Rob stared at the ceiling, his instincts, honed by years of managing difficult people and complex projects, telling him that change was coming. And in his experience, change usually meant trouble. Chapter 2: Shadows and Secrets. Trevor Kane had always been good at reading people. It's what made him successful in sales, and it's what had drawn Linda Mitchell to him like a moth to flame. At 38, Trevor possessed the kind of easy charm that opened doors and loosened purse strings. His silver tongue had sold everything from used cars to timeshares, but his greatest sale had been convincing Linda that she deserved better than a husband who treated her like another piece of property. Trevor's apartment overlooked the harbor, a modest place that he'd furnished with rental furniture and fake artwork. Everything in his life was temporary, disposable, including the women who passed through it. But Linda was different. She represented something permanent, something valuable. She represented Robert Mitchell's money. He suspects something, Linda said, pacing Trevor's living room in the pale afternoon light. She'd been agitated all week, jumping at shadows, checking her phone obsessively. Rob's not stupid, baby, but he's predictable. Trevor pulled her close, feeling the tension in her shoulders. 15 years of the same routine, same priorities. Work, work, work. He doesn't see what's right in front of him. Linda had first walked into his car dealership 8 months ago, claiming she wanted to surprise Rob with a new truck for his birthday. Trevor had seen through that lie immediately. She was shopping for attention, not vehicles. The expensive clothes couldn't hide the loneliness in her eyes, the way she lit up when someone actually listened to her talk. It had taken 3 coffee dates before she'd kissed him. 2 weeks before she'd come to his apartment. A month before she'd started talking about how empty her marriage had become, how Rob worked all the time and barely seemed to notice she existed. I gave him the best years of my life, she'd whispered in Trevor's bed one afternoon. I was 22 when we met. I had dreams, plans, but Rob needed a wife who'd stay home, look pretty, and never ask for anything more. Trevor had listened and sympathized and slowly planted the seeds of an idea. Linda wasn't just unhappy. She was entitled to compensation for all those lost years. Rob Mitchell was worth millions, and Linda deserved her share. Divorce would be messy, expensive, and Rob would fight it with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to his business. But there were other ways to get what she deserved. Tell me about your day again, Trevor said, guiding Linda to the couch. Every detail. I had lunch with Cheryl like we planned. She took pictures of us at the restaurant, made sure to get timestamps on everything. Then we went to the spa. More pictures, more alibis. I was home by 4, just like I texted Rob. And Danny. Linda's face tightened. He's been quiet lately. Moody. But that's normal for his age, right? Trevor had been watching Danny Mitchell for weeks, studying the boy's patterns, his vulnerabilities. 15-year-olds were easily manipulated if you knew which buttons to push. Danny was angry at his father's absence, resentful of being ignored, desperate for attention. Trevor had been giving him that attention, slowly building trust. Kids pick up on tension, Trevor said carefully. Maybe he senses things aren't right at home. The plan had taken months to develop. Trevor had learned patience in his years of long-con sales tactics. Rob Mitchell was too smart and too careful to fall for anything obvious. But every man had blind spots, and Rob's was his absolute faith in his family. He'd built walls around his business empire, but left his home completely undefended. Phase 1 had been reconnaissance. Trevor had befriended Cheryl Brennan at a bar downtown, discovering she'd been Linda's college roommate. A few expensive dinners and some carefully applied charm had convinced Cheryl to reconnect with her old friend. Cheryl became Trevor's inside source, reporting on Linda's marriage, Rob's schedule, the family's routines. Phase 2 was seduction. Not just Linda, that had been easy, but the entire family structure. Trevor had positioned himself as Linda's confidant, the understanding friend who listened to her problems. Through Cheryl, he'd learned about Danny's struggles at school, his resentment toward his father. Trevor had orchestrated chance meetings with the boy, gradually building a relationship. Phase 3 was the setup. Rob Mitchell's reputation for ruthless business dealings made him enemies. His construction company had contracts with questionable partners, employed workers who'd been in trouble with the law. Trevor had spent weeks cultivating these connections, learning which men held grudges against Rob, which ones could be bought or threatened into cooperation. The video is perfect, Trevor assured Linda. Professional quality, perfect lighting, clear audio. Rob's face is unmistakable. Linda shuddered. I still can't believe you convinced me to help film that. What if someone finds out? Nobody will find out. The location is completely untraceable, and we destroyed all the equipment afterward. As far as anyone knows, Rob committed a felony, and you just happened to discover it. The video had been Trevor's masterstroke. Using deepfake technology and careful staging, they'd created footage showing Rob Mitchell engaged in something that would destroy his reputation and send him to prison. The technical details had cost Trevor $30,000, money he'd borrowed from very dangerous people. But the investment would pay dividends. Once we confront him with the evidence, he'll have no choice, Trevor continued. Prison or cooperation. He'll sign over power of attorney to you, transfer assets, liquidate investments. We'll be gone before he realizes what happened. Linda pulled away from him. What about Danny? I can't just abandon my son. This was the weak point in Linda's resolve, the maternal instinct that complicated everything. Trevor had prepared for this objection. Danny's 15. In 3 years, he'll be 18 and completely independent. Do you want him to remember his mother as the woman who stayed trapped in a loveless marriage, or the woman who was brave enough to take control of her life? It was manipulation, pure and simple, but Linda needed to believe she was the victim in this scenario. Trevor had learned that people could justify anything if you gave them the right narrative. Besides, Trevor added, once we're established somewhere else, Danny can visit. Maybe even come live with us when he's older. Linda nodded, but Trevor could see the doubt in her eyes. He'd have to be careful. If she wavered now, if maternal guilt overcame her greed, the entire plan would collapse. And Trevor owed too much money to too many dangerous people to walk away empty-handed. That evening, as Linda drove home to her perfect house and her unsuspecting husband, Trevor made a phone call. It's happening tomorrow night, he told the voice on the other end. Make sure Danny's ready to play his part. The voice confirmed understanding and hung up. Trevor poured himself a scotch and stood at his window, looking out at the harbor lights. By this time next week, he'd be on a beach somewhere warm, drinking better scotch and planning his next score. Rob Mitchell's empire would crumble. Linda would have her freedom and fortune, and Trevor would disappear into the sunset. The only question was whether Linda would stick to the plan when the moment came. Trevor had learned that people's true nature emerged under pressure. Tomorrow night, he'd discover whether Linda Mitchell was as ruthless as she needed to be, or if her maternal instincts would prove to be everyone's downfall. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. The garage door rumbled shut behind Rob as he pulled into his driveway at 11:30 p.m. The foundation pour had run late. A concrete truck had broken down, forcing them to source replacement material and work into the night. His clothes smelled of diesel and cement dust. His back ached from hours of supervision, but the job was done right. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen. Linda would be asleep, and Danny would be in his room with his headphones on, lost in whatever teenagers did on their phones until all hours. Rob grabbed his thermos and hard hat from the passenger seat, looking forward to a hot shower and his own bed. The kitchen light illuminated a note on the counter. Went to bed early. Headache. Love L. Rob frowned. Linda rarely got headaches, and she usually waited up for him no matter how late he worked. Another small thing, another deviation from the pattern he'd known for 18 years. His instincts prickled again, that same feeling he'd had when a subcontractor tried to slip substandard materials past his inspection. He was halfway up the stairs when he heard it, the sound of muffled crying coming from the garage. Rob backtracked quietly, his construction boots silent on the carpeted steps. Through the window, he could see light filtering under the garage door. Danny was out there, and from the sound of it, the boy was in serious distress. Rob slipped through the kitchen and opened the door connecting the house to the garage. Danny sat on a storage crate, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone screen. Tears streaked his cheeks, and his whole body shook with suppressed sobs. Danny, Rob stepped into the garage, closing the door behind him. Son, what's wrong? Danny looked up, and Rob saw something in his son's eyes he'd never seen before, fear. Raw, primal terror that made Rob's protective instincts surge. Dad, Danny's voice cracked. Dad, Mom told me to give you this. Danny's hands trembled as he held out the phone. On the screen, a video was playing. Rob took the device, squinting at the image, and felt his blood turn to ice. The video showed Rob Mitchell, unmistakably him, in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. He was standing over a young woman who was bound and crying, holding what looked like a metal pipe. The camera angle captured his face clearly as he raised the weapon. Son, I never did that. Rob's voice came out strangled. The video was impossible, insane. He'd never been in that warehouse, never hurt anyone, never. Danny backed away from him, terror transforming his features. Dad, look at the date on the video. Rob's hand shook as he checked the timestamp. Yesterday. The video was dated yesterday, during the hours he'd supposedly been at the Riverside site, surrounded by workers who could vouch for his presence. Danny, this is fake. This is impossible. I was at work yesterday, you know that. I was. Dad, please. Danny's voice broke completely. Please don't hurt me. The words hit Rob like a physical blow. His own son, afraid of him, believing he was capable of. Surprise. Rob spun toward the voice. Linda stood in the doorway, but this wasn't the woman who'd made him coffee that morning. Her smile was cold, predatory, nothing like the warm expression he'd fallen in love with 19 years ago. Daddy's going to jail, Linda continued, her voice sing-song, almost playful. Unless what? Rob's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. The video was fake, it had to be. But the technology, the quality, the timestamp. Unless you do exactly what I tell you to do. Linda stepped fully into the garage, and Rob noticed she was dressed differently than when he'd left that morning. Black clothes, gloves, like she was preparing for something. Linda, what the hell is this? What's going on? What's going on, Rob? Is that you're finally going to pay for 18 years of neglect. 18 years of treating me like a pretty decoration while you built your little empire. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The strange behavior, the fake alibis, the way Danny had been avoiding him. How long have you been planning this? Long enough. A new voice entered the conversation. A man stepped out from behind Rob's workbench, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of practiced smile Rob had seen on 1,000 salesmen. Rob Mitchell, the man said, extending his hand with mock politeness. Trevor Kane, I've heard so much about you. Rob ignored the offered handshake. You're the one behind this. Behind what? I'm just Linda's friend. The friend who's been listening to her for months while you ignored her. The friend who's been giving Danny the attention his father had never bothered with. You son of a... Rob started toward Trevor, but Linda's voice stopped him. I wouldn't do that, Rob. Not with Danny watching. Not when that video is already uploaded to a secure server. ready to be sent to the police with a single text message. Rob looked at his son, who was pressed against a garage wall, phone clutched to his chest like a shield. "Danny, you don't believe this. You know I would never. I don't know anything anymore." Danny shouted. "You're never here. You don't talk to me. You don't care about anything except work and money and—" Danny's voice broke again. "Trevor's been more of a father to me these past few months than you ever were." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Rob had worked 16-hour days for this boy, had built an empire to secure his future, had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities Rob had never had. And Danny had chosen a stranger over his own father. "Here's how this works," Trevor said, his voice businesslike. "You're going to sign some documents, transfer certain assets, liquidate some investments, and in return, that video never sees the light of day. And if I refuse?" Linda's smile widened. "Then you'll be in prison within 24 hours, facing charges that will destroy everything you've built. Your company, your reputation, your freedom. Everything." Rob looked around the garage, at his tools, his workbench, the space where he'd taught Danny to change oil and check tire pressure. Memories of better times, when his family had seemed solid and permanent. "You miscalculated," Rob said quietly. "Excuse me." Trevor's confidence wavered slightly. "You think you know me. You think you understand what kind of man I am." Rob's voice was calm, controlled, but something had shifted in his posture. "You see a businessman who'll negotiate when cornered. A family man who'll do anything to protect his reputation." Linda and Trevor exchanged glances. Danny pressed further against the wall. "You're wrong," Rob continued. "I'm not a businessman who happens to work construction. I'm a construction worker who learned business. I'm the kind of man who fought for everything he has, who broke bones and shed blood to build something from nothing." "Dad!" Danny's voice was small, uncertain. "And you," Rob looked directly at his son, "chose them over me. Your own father." "Rob, don't be dramatic," Linda said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Just sign the papers, and—" "I built this life with my hands," Rob interrupted. "And if it burns down, I'll rebuild it the same way. But first—" Rob's smile was nothing like the warm expression his family knew. It was the smile of a man who'd grown up in rough neighborhoods, who'd settled disputes with fists before he'd learned to settle them with lawyers. "First, you're all going to learn what happens when you threaten Robert Mitchell." Trevor stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "One text message, old man. One text, and your life is over." "Send it," Rob said. "But understand something. When that video goes public, I'll have nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world." The temperature in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Danny whimpered softly, finally understanding that his father wasn't the broken man they'd expected to find. Linda's hand moved toward Trevor's arm, a warning gesture. But Trevor was too arrogant, too invested in his plan to recognize the shift in power dynamics. His finger hovered over his phone screen, ready to destroy Rob Mitchell's life. He had no idea that Rob Mitchell was about to destroy his. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Prey. Rob stood motionless for 3 heartbeats, his mind shifting into the calculating mode that had built his empire. Every successful construction project began with assessment. Understanding the foundation, identifying weak points, determining which structures could bear weight and which would crumble under pressure. "Send the video," Rob repeated, his voice steady. "I'm curious to see how far you've thought this through." Trevor's finger hesitated over the phone screen. Something in Rob's tone had clearly unsettled him. "You're bluffing. You have too much to lose." "Do I?" Rob took a step closer, and Trevor instinctively backed up. "Let's examine what I actually lose. My reputation? Built it once, I can build it again. My company? I know every competitor in the tri-state area, every foreman worth hiring, every client worth keeping. My money." Rob glanced at Linda. "Half of it goes to my cheating wife anyway." Linda's face had gone pale. "Rob, you're not thinking clearly. The charges alone will." "Will what?" "Stick." Rob laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think I survived 30 years in construction without learning how to spot a setup? That video is impressive work. Probably cost you serious money. But you made one critical error. Trevor's confidence was cracking. What error? You assumed I'm the same man I was 18 years ago. The man who worked alone, who had no connections, no resources beyond his own two hands. Rob pulled out his own phone, speed dialing a number. You forgot that I'm Robert Mitchell now. The call connected immediately. Rob? Jesus, it's almost midnight. What's? Pete, I need you to listen carefully. Someone just showed me a deep fake video of me committing a felony. Very high quality, professional work. I need to know who in the tri-state area has the equipment and expertise to produce something like that. Detective Pete Romano had been Rob's friend since childhood, back when they'd both been scrapping in the same tough neighborhood. Pete had chosen law enforcement. Rob had chosen construction. But they'd maintained their friendship through 3 decades, bound by shared history and mutual respect. Deepfake? Rob, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? I'll explain later. Right now I need that information. Give me an hour. And Rob, don't do anything stupid until I call you back. Rob ended the call and looked at Trevor, whose face had gone ashen. You see, the beauty of building a successful business is that you collect resources. Contacts. People who owe you favors. People who trust you. You can't prove anything, Trevor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Rob smiled. Pete Romano is one of the best detectives in the state. He'll trace that video back to its source within hours. Professional deepfake work requires serious equipment, and there are only a handful of operators in this region. Rob began pacing the garage, his movements predatory. But that's just the beginning. See, once Pete confirms this is fraud, I'll have ground for a lawsuit. Conspiracy, extortion, alienation of affection, intentional infliction of emotional distress. My lawyers will tear through your lives like a tornado. Linda found her voice. Rob, please. We can work this out. We can. Work what out? Rob's gaze fixed on her with surgical precision. 18 years of marriage, and you plan to destroy me over what? Money? Freedom? Or just the thrill of betraying everything we built together? You don't understand what it's been like. Linda's voice rose. Being married to someone who cares more about concrete and steel than. Stop. The single word cut through her protest like a blade. Don't you dare make this about my work. Everything I built, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for this family. For you. For him. Rob's eyes found Danny, who was still pressed against the wall. And you both chose a stranger over me. Trevor was frantically typing on his phone. Rob could see the panic in his movements, the desperate attempt to salvage a plan that was disintegrating by the minute. Were you texting? Rob asked. Your technical support? Your financial backers? Or maybe the dangerous people you borrowed money from to finance this operation? Trevor's head snapped up. How did you know about your debts? Your desperate situation? Your history of long-con sales tactics? Rob's smile was razor-sharp. You've been watching my family for months. Did you really think I wouldn't have you investigated the moment I realized something was wrong? The lie came easily, but it hit its target. Trevor's face went white as he processed the implications. That's right, Rob continued. I've known about you for weeks. About your apartment, your debts, your history of targeting wealthy women. About the people you owe money to, very dangerous people who don't accept excuses when payment comes due. Linda looked between Rob and Trevor, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Trevor, what is he talking about? What debts? Trevor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and visibly flinched. I need to take this. By all means, Rob gestured magnanimously. Don't let me interrupt your business. Trevor stepped toward the corner of the garage, turning his back to the group. His voice was low, urgent, but Rob caught fragments. Need more time? Complications? Payment coming. Rob used the distraction to move closer to Danny. His son was trembling, tears still streaking his face, looking younger than his 15 years. Danny, Rob said quietly. Look at me. The boy's eyes met his father's, and Rob saw the confusion there, the dawning realization that perhaps he'd misjudged the situation entirely. I need you to understand something, Rob continued. That man has been manipulating you, using your feelings against me to serve his own purposes. He doesn't care about you or your mother. You're just tools to him. But he said, he listened to me when you wouldn't. And what did he tell you to do? How did he convince you to betray your own father? Danny's face crumpled. He said you didn't really love us, that you only cared about work. He said if I helped him, you'd finally pay attention to me. The admission hit Rob like a physical blow. His son, desperate for attention, manipulated by a predator who'd identified his vulnerabilities and exploited them ruthlessly. Danny, Rob's voice was gentle now, the anger temporarily set aside. I've made mistakes. I've worked too much, been absent too often. But I love you more than my own life. Everything I've done has been to build something for you, to give you opportunities one never had. I know, Danny whispered. I know that now. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Rob pulled his son into a fierce embrace, feeling the boy's shoulders shake with sobs. Over Danny's head, he watched Trevor finish his phone call. The man's face was grim, desperate. The walls were closing in from multiple directions. Linda stood frozen, watching her family reconcile while her own world crumbled around her. The confident woman who delivered ultimatums 15 minutes ago was gone, replaced by someone who was finally understanding the true scope of her mistake. The video is already uploaded, Trevor said, returning to the group. Even if we wanted to stop this now, who says we want to stop it? Rob released Danny, but kept one hand on his son's shoulder. You see, Trevor, you've been thinking like a small-time con artist. But I think bigger than that. Rob's phone rang. Pete Romano, calling back early. Rob, I found your deepfake artist. Guy named Morrison operates out of a warehouse in the industrial district. Expensive equipment, very skilled, but he's got a gambling problem. Word is he's been taking high-risk jobs to pay off debts. Thanks, Pete. I owe you. Rob, what are you planning? This sounds like justice, Rob said, and ended the call. Trevor's face had gone gray. The warehouse, the equipment, the operator, all the threads of his plan were unraveling in real time. Here's what's going to happen, Rob said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd commanded construction crews and boardrooms for decades. That video gets released, and the investigation begins immediately. Morrison talks to save his own skin. They always do. The money trail leads back to you, Trevor. The conspiracy charges, the extortion, the fraud, it all lands on your head. Linda's involved too, Trevor said desperately. She helped film it. She's part of... Is she? Rob's smile was arctic cold. Because from where I stand, it looks like my wife was manipulated by a predator who targeted her vulnerabilities just like he targeted my son's. A skilled prosecutor could paint her as another victim in your scheme. Linda stared at Rob in shock. After everything she'd done, he was offering her a way out. But that protection comes with conditions, Rob continued. Full cooperation, complete honesty about your involvement. And most importantly, Rob's gaze fixed on Linda with laser intensity. You disappear from my life forever. You sign whatever papers my lawyers put in front of you. You take nothing from this marriage except what I choose to give you, and you never contact me or Danny again. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and Danny's quiet sniffling. 3 lives hung in the balance, waiting for decisions that would reshape everything. Trevor was the first to break. Linda, we need to talk. Privately. No, Rob said. Whatever you have to say, you say it here. No more secrets, no more schemes. Everything in the open from now on. The trap had been sprung, but not in the way any of them had expected. The hunter had become the prey, and Robert Mitchell was just getting started. Chapter 5. Dismantling the Enemy. Trevor Kane had spent his entire adult life reading people, identifying their pressure points, exploiting their weaknesses. But standing in Rob Mitchell's garage at midnight, watching his carefully constructed plan crumble, he finally understood what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by a superior opponent. Linda, Trevor's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. We need to stick to the plan. The video is already uploaded. The financial transfers are ready. All you need is her signature on documents that will make you rich while she goes to prison, Rob interrupted. Because that's what this was always about, wasn't it, Trevor? The money. Linda looked between the two men, her world tilting on its axis. Trevor? What is he talking about? Rob pulled out his phone again, this time opening a voice recording app. Tell her about the insurance policy, Trevor. The one where if this goes wrong, she takes the fall while you disappear with liquid assets. I don't know what you are. Tell her about the offshore accounts you've been setting up. The exit strategy that involves her facing federal charges while you sip cocktails on a beach somewhere. Rob's voice was calm, matter of fact. Tell her how you've been playing the long game. Not just on me, but on her too. The look on Linda's face was heartbreaking. The expression of someone watching their last refuge crumble. Trevor, is that true? Trevor's practiced charm finally abandoned him completely. Linda, you have to understand the risk management required. Risk management? Linda's voice rose to a shriek. You bastard. You were planning to abandon me. Like you planned to abandon your family, Rob observed quietly. Funny how betrayal travels in circles. Danny had been silent during this exchange, still pressed against his father's side, but now he spoke up. Mom, why did you do this? Why did you want to hurt Dad? Linda's attention shifted to her son, and Rob saw something break in her expression. Whatever anger had driven her to this point, whatever justification she'd built in her mind, they crumbled under her child's questioning gaze. I thought, Linda's voice faltered. I thought he didn't love us anymore. I thought he cared more about his work than his family. So you decided to destroy him, Danny said, and the condemnation in his young voice was absolute. You decided to send him to prison. Danny, you don't understand how complicated. I understand that you're my mother, and you try to destroy my father. Danny pulled away from Rob and faced Linda directly. Trevor told me it was just about getting Dad's attention, making him realize what he was losing. He never said anything about prison or destroying his life. Rob felt a surge of pride at his son's moral clarity, even as his heart broke for the boy's pain. To discover that one parent had been willing to sacrifice the other for personal gain. No child should have to process that kind of betrayal. Trevor was backing toward the garage door, clearly calculating his chances of escape. But Rob had anticipated this. I wouldn't, Rob said conversationally. Pete Romano has units positioned around the neighborhood. They've been there since I called him. It was another bluff, but Trevor couldn't know that. His shoulders sagged in defeat. Here's what's going to happen, Rob continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders that weren't questioned. Trevor, you're going to call Morrison and tell him to destroy all evidence of the video project. Then you're going to transfer any assets you've already moved back to their original accounts. I can't. The people I owe money to are going to be disappointed. That's what happens when you gamble with money you don't have. Rob's tone was unsympathetic. You chose to target my family to solve your problems. Now you get to face the consequences. Rob turned to Linda, and you're going to choose. Right now, in front of our son, you can cooperate fully, help me destroy every trace of this conspiracy, and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Or you can stand by Trevor, face federal charges for extortion and fraud, and spend the next decade in prison. Linda looked at Trevor, searching his face for some sign that he had a solution, a backup plan, anything that would salvage this disaster. But Trevor's expression was that of a man watching his own execution. What about Danny? Linda asked finally. What about him? Rob's voice was ice cold. You made your choice when you decided to use him against me. You forfeited your right to maternal concern the moment you turned my son into a weapon. Dad, Danny said quietly. Can I talk to Mom? Alone. Rob hesitated. After everything that had happened, the idea of leaving Linda alone with Danny felt dangerous. But his son had been through enough trauma for one night. If this conversation would help him process what had happened, Rob could allow it. 5 minutes, Rob said. Trevor and I will step outside. Rob gestured for Trevor to precede him out of the garage. The night air was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. Rob could hear Danny's voice through the thin walls, too low to make out words, but carrying the tone of someone working through profound disappointment. You really think you've won, Trevor said, leaning against Rob's truck. But this isn't over. There are people involved in this that you don't know about, people who won't just walk away because your plan fell apart. The people you owe money to? Rob studied Trevor's face in the dim streetlight. The ones who fronted you cash for the deepfake operation? Tell me about them. Trevor's laugh was bitter. You think you're tough because you built a construction company? These people break kneecaps for entertainment. They don't care about your reputation or your connections. They want their money, and they're going to get it one way or another. From me, you mean? Since your original plan failed. From someone. And Linda's still legally your wife, which makes her responsible for community debts. The threat was clear, and Rob felt his anger shift into something colder, more focused. It was one thing to target him directly. Threatening Linda, despite her betrayal, was another matter entirely. How much? Rob asked. 80 grand plus interest. They're not the patient type. Rob did quick calculations. 80,000 was significant, but manageable, especially if it eliminated an ongoing threat. But paying Trevor's debts felt like rewarding failure, encouraging future attacks. Here's a better idea, Rob said. You're going to make some phone calls. You're going to explain to these dangerous friends of yours that the job failed, the target proved too difficult, and they need to write off the loss. They don't write off losses. They collect them in blood. Not if you give them something better. Rob's smile was predatory. You see, Trevor, you're not the only one with dangerous connections. The difference is mine are legal. Rob pulled out his phone and showed Trevor a contact list that included judges, prosecutors, federal agents, and police commissioners. 30 years of successful business builds a lot of relationships. My lawyer plays golf with the district attorney. My accountant is married to a federal judge. My best friend from childhood runs the organized crime task force. Trevor's face went white as he processed the implications. So here's what you're going to do, Rob continued. You're going to convince your creditors that pursuing this debt would expose them to federal investigation. You're going to make them understand that Robert Mitchell is not a target. He's a trap. The garage door opened, and Danny emerged, his face streaked with tears, but his posture more settled. Linda followed, looking like a woman who'd just attended her own funeral. We talked, Danny said simply. I understand why she did it, but I can't forgive it. She's my mother, but she chose to hurt our family. That's not something I can just forget. Rob felt his heart break for his son's lost innocence. 15 years old, and already learning that the people you trust most can be the ones who hurt you deepest. Linda, Rob asked, what's your decision? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. I'll cooperate. I'll sign whatever you want to sign. Just, please don't completely destroy me. I know I don't deserve mercy, but you'll get what you deserve, Rob said. Nothing more, nothing less. He looked at Trevor, who was staring at his phone like it might explode. And you're going to start making those calls. Right now. Because every minute you delay makes this situation worse for everyone involved. Trevor nodded slowly, finally understanding that his only path to survival ran through Robert Mitchell's mercy. And mercy, Rob had learned that night, was a luxury he could no longer afford. The conspiracy was unraveling. The conspirators were broken. But Rob's real work was just beginning. Destroying his enemies had been the easy part. Rebuilding his family's trust, healing his son's wounds, and constructing a new life from the wreckage of the old one. That would require all the skills that had built his empire, and some he was only just beginning to discover. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and careful orchestration. Rob had transformed his home office into a war room, coordinating multiple simultaneous operations with the precision that had made Mitchell & Sons the most successful construction company in the region. Linda sat at the kitchen table, signing document after document under the watchful eye of Rob's attorney, Margaret Shunn, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in high-stakes divorce proceedings. Each signature stripped away another piece of the life Linda had known, reducing 18 years of marriage to legal boilerplate and financial settlements. This transfers your interest in the Westfield property to your husband, Margaret explained, sliding another form across the table. You'll retain ownership of the downtown condo, the Lexus, and a settlement of $200,000. Linda's hand trembled as she signed. $200,000 sounded generous until you considered she was walking away from a marriage worth several million. But generosity wasn't the point. Control was. Rob was demonstrating that he held all the power now, that her cooperation was rewarded, but her betrayal came with consequences. Trevor had spent those same 48 hours making increasingly desperate phone calls. Rob could hear fragments of conversation through the thin walls of the guest room where Trevor was confined. Explanations, pleas, promises that sounded less convincing with each iteration. The Kozlov organization isn't known for patience. Detective Pete Romano had explained when Rob called for background on Trevor's creditors. Russian mob, mostly loan sharking and protection rackets. They've got legitimate business fronts, but their collection methods are definitely old school. How old school? Hospital old school. Sometimes morgue old school. Rob had factored this information into his planning. The Kozlovs represented an ongoing threat that needed to be neutralized permanently, not temporarily. You couldn't negotiate with people like that. You could only eliminate them or redirect their attention elsewhere. Danny had returned to school, though Rob could see the strain in his son's face. The boy was processing trauma that no 15-year-old should have to handle, learning lessons about trust and betrayal that would shape his character for the rest of his life. Rob had arranged for counseling, but some wounds could only heal with time. The video has been completely destroyed, Trevor reported on the second day, his voice hoarse from stress and sleepless nights. Morrison wiped his servers and destroyed the hardware. There's no trace of it anywhere. Good, Rob said. Now tell me about the Kozlovs. Trevor's face went ashen. What about them? Their business model, their operations, their weaknesses. Everything you know. Rob, you don't understand. These aren't people you can intimidate or outsmart. They're businessmen, Rob interrupted. Violent businessmen, but businessmen nonetheless. They respond to profit and loss like everyone else. The question is how to make your debt more expensive to collect than it's worth. Rob had been researching the Kozlov organization since Pete first mentioned them. They operated several legitimate businesses, a trucking company, 2 restaurants, a construction supply warehouse. The construction connection was interesting. Rob had never dealt with them directly, but he knew their reputation in the industry. Alexei Kozlov, Rob mused, reading from a file on his desk, owns Kozlov Materials, supplies concrete and steel to half the contractors in the city, including some of my competitors. Trevor looked confused. What does that have to do with? Everything. Rob's smile was sharp. See, Trevor, you're thinking like a small-time criminal, but I think like a businessman. And in business, leverage is everything. Rob picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized hours earlier. The call was answered on the second ring by a heavily accented voice. Kozlov Materials. This is Alexei. Mr. Kozlov, this is Robert Mitchell of Mitchell & Sons Construction. I understand we have a mutual acquaintance who's created some complications. There was a pause, the sound of calculation. Mr. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. What complications? Trevor Kane owes you money. Money he borrowed to finance an operation against my family. That operation has failed, and Mr. Kane is now under my protection. Another pause, longer this time. Protection is expensive, Mr. Mitchell. $80,000 expensive. I'm not calling to pay his debt. I'm calling to offer you something more valuable than money. I'm listening. Exclusive supplier status for the Riverside project. $12 million in concrete and steel, with guaranteed payment schedules and completion bonuses, plus preferential consideration for all future Mitchell & Sons projects. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Rob could practically hear Alexei's mental calculations. 80,000 in questionable debt versus millions in legitimate business. This is contingent on Mr. Kane's debt being forgiven. Completely forgiven. Clean slate. And if Mr. Kane attempts similar operations in the future, then he becomes your problem again. But until then, he's off limits. Acceptable. I will prepare the contracts. Rob ended the call and looked at Trevor, who was staring at him in amazement. Why did you do that? Rob finished. Because smart enemies are more dangerous than smart allies. You've seen what I'm capable of when threatened. Would you rather have me as a partner or an adversary? Trevor nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. What do you want from me? Information. Names. Details about everyone involved in this conspiracy. I want to know who else might come after my family, who else might think we're easy targets. And in return, you get to live. You get to start over somewhere else with a clean slate. But you disappear, Trevor, permanently. If I ever see you within 100 miles of my family again, the Kozlovs will be the least of your problems. Trevor spent the next hour detailing every aspect of the conspiracy, every person involved, every loose end that might cause future problems. Rob recorded everything, building a comprehensive picture of the threat landscape around his family. By Thursday evening, the immediate crisis was resolved. Linda had signed the final papers and would be moving to the downtown condo within the week. Trevor had a bus ticket to Portland and enough cash to start over somewhere the Kozlovs would never find him. The legal complications were settled, the financial arrangements finalized. But Rob knew this was just the beginning. The attack on his family had exposed vulnerabilities he'd never considered, blind spots in his defenses that needed to be addressed. More importantly, it had shown him something about himself, something cold and calculating that he'd kept buried under years of legitimate business success. That evening, Rob found Danny in his room, homework spread across his desk, but clearly struggling to concentrate. "How are you holding up, son?" Danny looked up, and Rob saw the same steely determination in his son's eyes that he recognized in his own mirror. "I'm angry, Dad. Really angry. At me? For how I handled this. No, at myself. For being so stupid, for letting them use me against you." Danny's voice was tight with self-recrimination. "I should have seen through it. I should have known better." Rob sat on the edge of the bed. "You're 15, Danny. You're supposed to trust people, supposed to believe that adults have your best interests at heart. What happened wasn't your fault, but I chose them over you. Even when you tried to tell me the truth, I believed them instead. And what have you learned from that?" Danny considered the question seriously. That trust has to be earned. That people can lie even when they claim to love you. That sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous. Rob felt a chill at his son's words. They were true, but they were also the kind of hard lessons that could turn a person cynical, cold, isolated. The kind of lessons that had shaped Rob's own character in his youth. "Those are important lessons," Rob said carefully. "But don't let them make you hard, Danny. Don't let what happened here turn you into someone who can't love or trust anyone." "How do you do it, Dad? How do you trust anyone after something like this?" Rob was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer that would serve his son well. "You trust carefully. You verify before you believe. And you never, ever forget that some betrayals are unforgivable." Danny nodded, processing this wisdom with the seriousness of someone who'd learned adult lessons the hard way. "Dad, what's going to happen to Mom? She's going to live with the choices she made. Some consequences can't be negotiated away or bought off. She betrayed her family, and that's not something you recover from. Do you think she's sorry?" Rob considered the question. Linda had cried during the final document signing, had begged for forgiveness, had promised it would never happen again. But remorse and genuine change were different things entirely. "I think she's sorry she got caught," Rob said finally. "I think she's sorry her plan failed. Whether she's actually sorry for what she did, that's something only she can answer." Danny returned his homework, and Rob headed downstairs to his office. He had calls to make, plans to finalize, a new security structure to implement around his family. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Rob Mitchell had learned something important about himself during this crisis. He was capable of things he'd never imagined. Cold things, ruthless things, and that capability would serve him well in the battles that were surely coming. Because men like Robert Mitchell didn't just have enemies, they created them. And the price of betrayal, Rob had decided, was something he would collect in full from anyone foolish enough to threaten his family again. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after the garage confrontation, Rob stood in his office reviewing the quarterly reports that confirmed what he already knew. Mitchell & Sons was experiencing unprecedented growth. The exclusive contract with Kozlov Materials had opened doors to larger projects, government contracts, and partnerships that would have taken years to develop through conventional channels. But success in business was only part of Rob's transformation. The man who had once trusted implicitly now verified everything. The father who had once worked long hours to provide for his family now understood that presence was more valuable than provision. The husband who had once believed in the permanence of marriage now lived alone in a house that had been purged of every trace of Linda's existence. Danny had adapted to their new reality with resilience that both impressed and worried Rob. The boy was thriving academically, excelling in sports, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. At 16, Danny had learned lessons about betrayal and consequence that most people didn't master until middle age. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," Danny said one evening over dinner. They ate together every night now, a ritual Rob had instituted to rebuild the connection that had been damaged by years of work-focused absence. "What's on your mind, son?" "I've been getting messages from Mom." Rob set down his fork carefully. Linda's contact with Danny was explicitly forbidden under the separation agreement, a violation that could result in legal consequences. "What kind of messages?" "Texts mostly, sometimes emails. She wants to see me, to explain her side of what happened. She says you're keeping us apart unfairly." Rob studied his son's face, noting the tension there. "What do you think about that?" "I think she had her chance to explain. In the garage that night, when everything came out, she chose Trevor over us, chose money over family. I don't see what else there is to discuss." The cold logic in Danny's voice was startling. Rob recognized his own analytical nature reflected in his son, but worried about the emotional cost of such detachment. "Danny, she's still your mother. Despite everything that happened, despite the choices she made, that biological connection doesn't mean anything," Danny interrupted. "Biology doesn't create obligation. Love and loyalty have to be earned, just like respect. She forfeited her right to be my mother when she tried to destroy my father." Rob felt a mixture of pride and concern at his son's moral clarity. The boy had developed an ethical framework that was admirably consistent, but potentially limiting. Learning to never forgive meant never being vulnerable, but it also meant never experiencing the full range of human connection. "Have you responded to her messages?" "Once. I told her that any contact needed to go through you, that I wasn't interested in secret communication. She hasn't respected that boundary." Rob made a mental note to have his lawyer send Linda another cease and desist letter. Testing boundaries was typical behavior for someone who'd lost control and was looking for any avenue back into the lives she'd abandoned. "There's something else," Danny continued. "I've been doing some research on Trevor." "What kind of research?" "Social media, public records, business registrations. I wanted to know what happened to him after he left town." Rob had been wondering the same thing, but hadn't actively investigated. Trevor Kane's fate was less important than ensuring he stayed gone, but curiosity was natural. "What did you find?" "He's in Portland, like you suggested, working a used car lot, living in a studio apartment. Completely different life than what he had here." Danny paused. "He looks broken." "Good," Rob said without hesitation. "Actions have consequences. He chose to target our family, and now he's living with the results of that choice." "Do you think he learned his lesson?" Rob considered the question. Men like Trevor Kane were fundamentally opportunistic, always looking for angles, always calculating risk versus reward. The question wasn't whether he'd learned a lesson. It was whether he'd learned the right lesson. "He learned that I'm not an easy target," Rob said finally. Whether he learned not to target anyone is a different question entirely. That weekend, Rob received a call that confirmed his instincts about unfinished business. Pete Romano's voice was tense with professional concern. "Rob, we need to talk. In person. How soon can you get to my office?" An hour later, Rob sat across from his childhood friend in the detective's cramped office, studying crime scene photos that made his blood run cold. "Alexei Kozlov was found dead in his office 3 days ago," Pete explained. "Professional hit, very clean, very thorough. The kind of work that costs serious money." Rob stared at the photos, his mind racing through implications. "Any suspects?" "Competing organizations, mostly. The Kozlovs have been expanding their territory, stepping on toes. But there's something else." Pete leaned forward. "Alexei had been asking questions about you, about your business, your family, your relationship with Trevor Kane. Starting about 2 weeks ago, he was being very careful, very discreet, but word gets around in my business." Rob processed this information, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Someone hired Alexei to investigate me, then killed him to cover their tracks. That's my working theory. The question is who and why now, 6 months after the Trevor Kane situation was resolved. Rob thought about Linda's messages to Danny, about boundary testing and probing for weaknesses. Pete, I need you to look into something for me. Linda's been trying to contact Danny against court orders. I want to know if she's working alone or if someone's encouraging that contact. You think she's involved in this? I think someone is cleaning up loose ends. Alexei knew about Trevor's debt, about the deal we made to resolve it. If someone wanted to eliminate all traces of that arrangement. Pete nodded grimly. They need to silence everyone involved. Trevor, Linda, Alexei, potentially you and Danny. The scope of the threat was becoming clear. This wasn't random violence or competitive business practices. This was a systematic elimination of witnesses to the events 6 months ago. Someone was preparing for something that required complete secrecy. I need protection for Danny, Rob said. Whatever this is, whoever's behind it, they're thinking long-term and they're thinking thoroughly. Already arranged. Patrol units will be monitoring your house and Danny's school. But Rob, Pete's expression was serious. You need to consider the possibility that you're not just a target. You might be the primary target. Rob had been thinking the same thing. The attack on his family 6 months ago had been personal, driven by greed and desperation. This felt different, professional, calculated, methodical. The kind of operation that required resources and planning. Who benefits from my death? Rob asked aloud. Besides Linda, your business competitors, anyone who owes you money, anyone who's been on the wrong side of your deals over the years. Pete consulted his notes. You made enemies, Rob. Successful men always do. But even as Pete spoke, Rob was thinking deeper, looking for connections that went beyond simple business rivalry. The timing was wrong for coincidence. 6 months after the Trevor Kane crisis, just as his business was reaching new heights of success, just as his relationship with Danny was stronger than ever, someone wanted to tear it all down. Pete, I need you to dig into Linda's finances since the separation. See if she's been receiving money from unknown sources, if anyone's been supporting her lifestyle. You think she's being bankrolled? I think she's being used. Again, and this time, the people using her are much more dangerous than Trevor Kane ever was. Rob left the police station with a clear understanding of his situation. The attack on his family 6 months ago hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been phase one of a longer campaign. Someone with resources and patience was systematically targeting the Mitchell family, and they'd been planning this operation for months. But if his enemies thought Robert Mitchell would be easier to eliminate than he'd been to intimidate, they were about to learn the same lesson Trevor Kane had learned. Rob had built his empire by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than his competitors. Now he would defend it the same way. The war for his family's survival was just beginning, and Rob intended to win it decisively. Because the price of losing wasn't just his life or his business. It was his son's future, and that was something Robert Mitchell would never allow anyone to threaten. Chapter 8, Blood and Steel. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, professional and swift. Rob's security system detected the breach at 5:47 a.m. 3 vehicles, 8 men, military precision. But Robert Mitchell hadn't survived 30 years in construction by being unprepared for dangerous situations. The safe room he'd built in the basement could withstand a direct assault for hours. Danny was there in 30 seconds, confused but trusting his father's emergency protocols. Rob activated the silent alarm, connecting directly to Pete Romano's private line, then armed himself with weapons he'd hoped never to use. Dad, what's happening? Danny's voice was steady despite the circumstances, a testament to the emotional resilience he'd developed since his mother's betrayal. Someone's trying to finish what they started 6 months ago, Rob replied, checking the monitor feed from cameras positioned around the property. Professional team, military equipment. This isn't random. Through the basement speakers, they could hear footsteps above, systematic searching, the sound of furniture being overturned. The intruders were being thorough, looking for something specific. Rob's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. We have Linda. Trade yourself for her location. You have 10 minutes. The tactical situation crystallized instantly. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a hostage crisis designed to force Rob into an impossible choice. Save the woman who'd betrayed him, or let her die knowing he could have prevented it. Danny, listen to me very carefully, Rob said, pulling his son away from the monitors. I need you to stay in this room, no matter what happens upstairs. There's a secondary exit through the tunnel that leads to the neighbor's basement. If anything happens to me, you use that route and get to Pete Romano. Dad, you're not going up there. This is obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, but it's also an opportunity. Rob smiled grimly. They think they know Robert Mitchell, the businessman, the family man, the legitimate contractor. They don't know the man I was before I built all this. Rob had grown up in neighborhoods where survival meant violence, where disputes were settled with fists and sometimes worse. Those skills have been dormant for decades, buried under suits and contracts and legitimate success. But they'd never disappeared entirely. The house's intercom crackled with an unfamiliar voice. Mr. Mitchell, we know you're here. This doesn't have to be complicated. Come upstairs, and we can discuss terms like civilized people. Rob keyed the intercom response. Send me proof that Linda's alive, then we'll talk. Proof is expensive, Mr. Mitchell. But I suppose we can afford a small investment. A phone buzzed with an incoming video call. Linda's face appeared on screen, terror-stricken but apparently unharmed. She was in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by armed men. Rob, her voice was barely a whisper. They said they'll let me go if you. The video cut off, replaced by text. Ground floor. Alone. 5 minutes. Rob made his choice with the cold calculation that had built his empire. Linda's fate was her own responsibility. She'd chosen to involve herself with dangerous people, chosen to betray her family, chosen the path that led to this moment. But Danny's safety was non-negotiable. Son, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens next, whatever you see or hear, remember that everything I do is to protect you. Everything. Danny's eyes widened as he processed his father's tone. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Fear keeps you alive. Stay in this room. Use the tunnel if necessary. Trust only Pete Romano. Rob kissed his son's forehead. I love you, Danny. Remember that. Rob armed himself with tools from his construction days. Weapons that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, but could be devastatingly effective in experienced hands. He'd learned violence in back alleys and bar fights, refined it during years when solving problems with physical force was simply another business tool. The man waiting in Rob's living room was exactly what he'd expected. Military bearing, expensive clothes, the kind of professional competence that costs serious money. 2 associates flanked him, similarly equipped and positioned. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being reasonable. Let's skip the pleasantries. Who are you, and what do you want? My name is irrelevant. What I want is simple. The complete destruction of evidence from a certain video project 6 months ago, along with elimination of all witnesses to related financial arrangements. Rob kept his expression neutral. Trevor Kane's operation was thoroughly dismantled. There's nothing left to clean up. Except you, Mr. Mitchell, and your son, and the unfortunately persistent Ms. Linda Mitchell, who's been asking inconvenient questions about money transfers and offshore accounts. The pieces finally clicked into place. Linda hadn't been randomly testing boundaries with her messages to Danny. She'd been investigating the financial trail from Trevor's operation, trying to understand where the money had really come from and where it had gone. She found something, Rob said. She found enough to be dangerous. Names, account numbers, transaction records. Information that could expose operations much larger than Trevor Kane's amateur schemes. So you're cleaning house. We're protecting investments. Mr. Mitchell, your reputation for intelligence is well-deserved. Surely you understand that some secrets are worth killing for. Rob did understand, but understanding didn't mean accepting. These people had made a fundamental error in judgment. They'd assumed Robert Mitchell would negotiate when cornered, just as Trevor Kane had assumed 6 months earlier. Here's what's going to happen, Rob said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded construction crews and boardrooms for decades. You're going to release Linda. You're going to leave my son alone, and you're going to disappear from our lives permanently. The lead man smiled. And if we refuse, then you're going to learn why smart people don't threaten Robert Mitchell. The violence that followed was swift and brutal. Rob moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to fight before he'd learned to negotiate, using tools and techniques that had been honed in environments far more dangerous than corporate boardrooms. The first man went down with a nail gun to the chest, a construction tool repurposed for close-quarters combat. The second fell to a framing hammer applied with surgical precision. The third managed to draw his weapon before Rob's crowbar opened his skull like an overripe fruit. Professional killers, Rob had learned, were often unprepared for legitimate violence from unexpected sources. They planned for resistance from other professionals, not from successful businessmen who remembered how to kill with their hands. Rob's phone rang as he stood among the bodies. Pete Romano's voice was tense with urgency. "Rob, we found the warehouse. Linda's alive, but barely. These people were planning to eliminate everyone connected to the Kane operation. How many others are there? Unknown. But Rob, we found financial records. This goes deeper than Trevor Kane. Someone's been using small-time cons to test larger operations, identifying targets for much bigger schemes." Rob processed this information while surveying his destroyed living room. The attack on his family hadn't been personal. It had been professional. A test run for operations targeting other wealthy families, other successful businessmen. "Pete, I need you to listen carefully. There are 3 bodies in my house. Professional killers, armed and dangerous. They came here to kill me and my son, and they had Linda as leverage." "Jesus, Rob. Are you?" "I'm fine. Danny's safe. But this isn't over. Someone sent these people, someone with resources and connections. We need to find them before they send more." Rob ended the call and looked around his destroyed home. The house where he'd built a life, raised a son, trusted a wife who'd betrayed him. It was just property now, another asset to be protected or abandoned as circumstances demanded. What mattered was Danny's safety and the absolute certainty that no one would ever threaten his family again. Robert Mitchell had learned something important about himself during this crisis. He was capable of anything necessary to protect what he loved. And anyone foolish enough to test that capability would discover, as Trevor Kane and these professional killers had discovered, that the price of threatening Robert Mitchell was always paid in full. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 2 years after the warehouse confrontation, Robert Mitchell stood in his new office overlooking the harbor, watching construction crews put finishing touches on the Mitchell security complex. What had begun as a personal defense measure had evolved into a comprehensive security consulting firm, serving wealthy families and successful businesses throughout the region. The events that destroyed his marriage and tested his family had transformed Rob from a traditional contractor into something harder, more focused, infinitely more dangerous to those who might threaten what he protected. Mitchell and Sons still operated, still built quality structures throughout the tri-state area. But Mitchell Security was where Rob's true attention focused now, preventing other families from experiencing the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed his own. "Dad, the Portland team just checked in," Danny announced, entering the office with a tablet full of updates. At 18, Danny had grown into his father's analytical nature while maintaining the moral clarity that had emerged from his mother's betrayal. He would start college in the fall, but had spent his gap year learning the family businesses from the ground up. Any issues with the Kane surveillance? None. He's maintained the same routine for 23 months. Work, apartment, grocery store. No contact with criminal associates. No unusual financial activity. Either he's genuinely reformed or he's extremely careful. Rob suspected the latter. Men like Trevor Kane didn't reform. They adapted, evolved, learned from their mistakes. Keeping him under observation wasn't about punishment. It was about early warning. If Trevor ever decided to return to his old profession, Rob intended to know about it immediately. "What about Linda?" Danny's expression hardened slightly. "Same as always. The condo downtown, part-time job at the art gallery, limited social circle. She's been asking around about you again, trying to get information from your old business associates." Linda had never stopped probing for weaknesses, never stopped looking for angles. The financial settlement from their divorce had been generous but finite, and Rob suspected she was calculating whether another approach might yield better results. She learned nothing from Trevor's failure, except to be more careful about her methods. Any direct contact attempts? 3 messages this week. I deleted them without reading. Danny's relationship with his mother had remained severed since that night in the garage. Rob had offered counseling, encouraged reconciliation, even arranged supervised visits during the legal proceedings. But Danny's decision had been absolute and unwavering. Linda Mitchell had forfeited her right to be his mother when she chose betrayal over family. Rob worried about the emotional cost of such complete rejection, but he also respected his son's moral consistency. Danny had learned the hardest lesson anyone could learn, that trust, once broken completely, could never be rebuilt. The Harrison contract is ready for your signature, Danny continued, setting the tablet aside. Full estate security for the next 5 years. They specifically requested you personally after what happened to the Andersons. The Anderson case had been Rob's most high-profile success, preventing a kidnapping attempt against the tech mogul's family by identifying the threat weeks before it materialized. The methods Mitchell Security employed were unconventional, often legally questionable, but absolutely effective. Any word from Pete about the federal investigation? Still ongoing. The people behind the warehouse operation had connections in 12 states, operations targeting at least 30 families. The FBI thinks they were building towards something much larger. Rob had provided extensive cooperation with federal investigators, sharing everything he'd learned about the conspiracy that had targeted his family. But he'd also maintained private channels of information, ensuring that Mitchell Security stayed ahead of any threats that official law enforcement might miss. The war that had begun with Trevor Kane's amateur extortion scheme had revealed a much larger criminal enterprise. Professional operations targeting successful families, exploiting personal vulnerabilities to steal wealth and destroy lives. Rob's successful defense of his own family had made him a valuable ally to law enforcement and a sought-after protector for other potential targets. Danny, there's something we need to discuss. His son looked up from the tablet, instantly alert. Over the past 2 years, they developed a communication style based on absolute honesty and mutual respect. No secrets, no protected feelings, no assumptions that problems would resolve themselves without direct action. It's about your mother. Danny's expression didn't change, but Rob noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. What about her? She's dying. The words hung in the air between them. Rob had received the medical information from Linda's doctor 3 days earlier. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage, prognosis measured in months rather than years. How long? Danny asked, his voice professionally calm. 6 months, maybe less. Danny nodded, processing the information with the same analytical detachment he brought to security assessments and business analysis. Does she know you know? Yes. She asked me to tell you. Asked if you might consider visiting her. And what did you tell her? That the decision was yours to make. Danny was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the harbor where fishing boats were returning with their morning catch. Rob waited, knowing that his son needed time to work through the emotional complexities of the situation. She made her choice, Danny said finally. When she chose Trevor over us, when she decided to destroy our family for money, she ended any claim to my concern or my presence. Even knowing she's dying, especially knowing she's dying, this is her last chance to manipulate me, to use guilt and sympathy to get the emotional connection she forfeited through her actions. Rob felt a chill at his son's cold analysis, even as he admired the logical consistency. Danny had learned from his mother's betrayal, but perhaps he'd learned too well. Danny, mercy isn't weakness. Compassion doesn't require trust. You can acknowledge her suffering without forgiving her betrayal. Can I? Or would visiting her send the message that betrayal can be overcome with enough time and the right circumstances? It was a fair question, one that Rob had been wrestling with since receiving Linda's diagnosis. The moral framework they'd built together emphasized consequences, accountability, the permanent nature of certain choices. But it also risked creating people who were incapable of forgiveness, mercy, or growth? What do you think I should do? Danny asked. Rob considered his answer carefully. His son was 18 now, legally an adult, intellectually mature beyond his years. But he was also carrying wounds that might never fully heal, shaped by lessons that were both necessary and potentially limiting. I think you should remember that showing mercy to someone who's dying doesn't excuse their betrayal of you when they were living. You can be kind without being weak, compassionate without being foolish. Danny nodded slowly. And if I choose not to see her, then that's your choice to make, and I'll support it completely. What about you? Will you see her? Rob thought about Linda, the beautiful young waitress he'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd shared his dreams and helped him build a life, the wife who'd ultimately chosen to destroy everything they'd created together. Yes, he said finally. Not to forgive her, not to rebuild anything, but to close the circle. To end this chapter of our lives with clarity rather than unfinished business. Danny returned to his tablet, but Rob could see he was struggling with the decision. The boy had built his emotional defenses around absolute principles, but real life rarely offered absolute situations. Take your time, Rob said. Whatever you decide, we'll handle it together. That evening, Rob drove to Linda's condo for the first time since their divorce was finalized. She answered the door looking frail but still recognizable. The woman he'd shared 18 years with, now facing the consequences of choices that had seemed so important 2 years ago. Rob, thank you for coming. They sat in her living room, surrounded by furniture he'd paid for, artwork they'd selected together, photographs of a family that no longer existed. The conversation was awkward, stilted, weighted with history that couldn't be undone. I know you hate me, Linda said finally. I don't hate you, Rob replied honestly. Hate requires emotional investment. You're simply someone I used to know who made choices I can't respect. Linda flinched at the cold assessment, but nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. Will Danny come see me? I don't know. That's his decision to make. He's become just like you, hasn't he? Hard, unforgiving, incapable of mercy. Rob studied the woman who'd once been his wife, seeing the manipulation even in her dying moments. He's become someone who understands that actions have consequences. That trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt with words and time. And you think that's healthy? That emotional isolation? I think it's realistic. You taught him that the people closest to him could be the most dangerous. That's a lesson that will serve him well. Linda began to cry, quiet tears that might have moved him once, before he'd learned the cost of misplaced trust. I made a mistake, Rob. A terrible mistake. But I loved you both in my way. No, Rob said firmly. You loved what we could provide for you. Security, status, comfort. When you thought you could get those things more easily through betrayal than through loyalty, you chose betrayal. People change, Rob. People can learn from their mistakes, grow beyond their failures. Some people can. You had 2 years to prove you'd changed, to demonstrate growth or remorse or accountability. Instead, you've spent that time probing for new angles, testing boundaries, looking for ways to reinsert yourself into our lives. Linda's tears stopped as she processed the accusation. You've been watching me. Of course I have. You proved you can't be trusted, so trust became irrelevant. Verification became essential, and you'll watch me until I die. Until you die, or until you prove you're no longer a threat to my son's emotional well-being. Linda nodded slowly, finally understanding that this conversation wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about establishing final parameters, closing accounts, ensuring that her death wouldn't create new complications for the family she'd abandoned. Tell Danny, she said as Rob prepared to leave. Tell him I'm sorry. Not for the consequences, not for getting caught, but for the choice itself. For choosing someone else over the family I was supposed to protect. Rob looked back at her from the doorway. I'll tell him. Whether he believes it or cares about it is up to him. Linda Mitchell died 6 weeks later, alone in a hospice room, surrounded by flowers from people who'd known her briefly rather than deeply. Danny didn't attend the funeral, though he sent a single white rose with no note attached. Standing at her graveside, Rob felt neither satisfaction nor regret. Linda's death was simply the end of a chapter that had concluded long before her diagnosis. The woman he'd loved had died the night. She chose Trevor Kane over her family. What had passed away in the hospice was simply the physical remainder of someone who'd become a stranger through her own choices. No regrets? Pete Romano asked, standing beside his oldest friend as other mourners dispersed. None, Rob replied. She made her choices. We all live and die with the consequences of our decisions. And Danny? Rob looked toward his son, who was waiting by the car, strong and self-possessed, and utterly unmoved by the ceremony they'd just witnessed. Danny learned the most important lesson anyone can learn, that trust must be earned and that betrayal has permanent consequences. That's a hard way to live. It's an honest way to live. And in the long run, honesty serves people better than sentiment. They walked toward the car together, leaving Linda Mitchell's grave behind without looking back. The chapter was closed, the accounts were settled, and the future stretched ahead with the clarity that came from understanding exactly what was worth protecting and what price you were willing to pay to protect it. Robert Mitchell had built an empire with his hands, defended it with his mind, and preserved it through his willingness to do whatever was necessary when threatened. His son had learned those same lessons and would carry them forward into whatever challenges awaited. Some stories ended with forgiveness and reconciliation. This one ended with justice, accountability, and the understanding that actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away or bought off or forgiven into irrelevance. It ended, in other words, exactly as it should have. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mix-Up. Gerard Baxter adjusted his tie as he walked through the gleaming lobby of Meridian Financial, the investment firm where he'd worked as a senior analyst for the past 8 years. At 34, Gerard had built a reputation for his sharp, analytical mind and unshakable composure, traits that had served him well in both his professional life and his role as a devoted father to 7-year-old Emma. The morning had started like any other. His wife, Sally, a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, had been rushing to get Emma ready for school while Gerard prepared for an important client presentation. In the chaos of breakfast and backpack checking, Sally had grabbed what she thought was Gerard's laptop bag and handed it to him at the door. "Don't forget your presentation files," she'd said, kissing him goodbye. "Thanks, hon. See you tonight," Gerard had replied, not bothering to check the bag as he headed out. It wasn't until 2 p.m., when Gerard reached for his laptop to review quarterly reports, that he realized the mistake. Instead of his sleek black briefcase, he'd been carrying Emma's bright purple backpack with cartoon unicorns dancing across the fabric. Gerard chuckled to himself, imagining Emma's confusion when she discovered she had his boring work bag instead of her school supplies. He unzipped the backpack to see what treasures his daughter had packed for 2nd grade. What he found made him laugh out loud. 3 different colored pens, a half-eaten granola bar, a crumpled math worksheet with gold stars, and a small plastic container that looked like one of those pill organizers elderly people use for medication. Gerard picked up the container, smiling at Emma's organizational skills. She must have been keeping her vitamins sorted by day. "Hey, Stuart, come look at this," Gerard called to his colleague in the neighboring cubicle. Stuart Clements was a brilliant financial advisor who'd joined Meridian 2 years ago after an unexpected career change. Before numbers and portfolios, Stuart had spent 15 years as an emergency room physician at Denver General Hospital. Stuart rolled his chair over, his perpetually serious expression softening slightly. "What V you got there, Gerard?" "Emma's backpack got mixed up with my briefcase this morning. Look at this. My 7-year-old is more organized than half our clients." Gerard held up the pill organizer. "She's got her vitamins sorted by day of the week. Kids these days, right?" Stuart's face changed instantly. The mild amusement vanished, replaced by something Gerard had never seen before: raw, undiluted fear. Stuart's hands trembled as he took the container from Gerard's hands, his medical training kicking in as he examined it closely. Gerard. Stuart's voice was barely a whisper. Where did Emma get this? What do you mean? It's just her vitamin organizer. Sally probably set it up for her. Stuart's face had gone completely ashen. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. Gerard, listen to me very carefully. Drop everything you're doing. Get your daughter from school and drive to the hospital. Now. What? Stuart, what's wrong? You're scaring me. If I tell you what I think this is, you'll freeze up and waste precious time. Just move. Get Emma and get to St. Mary's emergency room. Tell them Dr. Stuart Clements sent you and that it's a possible poisoning case. Do it now. Gerard had known Stuart for 2 years, and he'd never seen the man lose his composure. The urgency in his voice, the way his medical instincts had taken over, it sent ice through Gerard's veins. I'm calling Sally, Gerard said, already reaching for his phone. No time. Go. I'll call ahead to the hospital and explain. Gerard, run. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Gerard broke multiple speed limits getting to Emma's school. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, and his mind raced through every possible scenario. What could be in that innocent-looking pill organizer that would make a former ER doctor react like that? Pine Ridge Elementary was in its afternoon dismissal routine when Gerard burst through the front doors. The secretary, Mrs. Patterson, looked up in surprise. Mr. Baxter, is everything all right? School doesn't end for another hour. I need to pick up Emma immediately. Family emergency. Mrs. Patterson must have seen something in his expression because she didn't ask any follow-up questions. Within 5 minutes, Emma was walking down the hallway, her small hand clutched in Gerard's larger one, confusion written across her face. Daddy, why are you here? Did I do something wrong? Gerard forced himself to stay calm as he buckled Emma into her car seat. No, sweetheart. Mommy needs us to meet her at the hospital where she works. Nothing's wrong. We just need to go there quickly. During the 15-minute drive to St. Mary's, Gerard called Sally. When she answered, he could hear the controlled chaos of the pediatric ward in the background. Ger? What's going on? Dr. Clements called here asking about Emma and something about poisoning. You're scaring me. I'll explain everything when I see you. Meet us in the emergency room. And Sally, bring whoever's in charge of toxicology. St. Mary's Hospital emergency room was a place Sally knew well, but seeing it from a parent's perspective sent chills down her spine. Gerard arrived with Emma just as Sally was walking through the automatic doors, her nurse's uniform still on from her shift. Mommy! Emma ran to Sally, who scooped her up despite the girl being almost too big to carry. What's this about? Sally asked Gerard, her professional nurse's demeanor fighting with her maternal panic. Gerard pulled the pill organizer from his jacket pocket. This was in Emma's backpack. Stuart took one look at it and told me to get her here immediately. Sally examined the container, her nursing experience immediately noting the careful organization and the way the pills were sorted. But like Gerard, she didn't see anything obviously dangerous. These look like children's vitamins, she said. The pink ones look like the gummy vitamins I give her every morning. Dr. Patricia Farrell, the head of emergency medicine, approached them. Sally had worked with her for 3 years and knew her as a no-nonsense physician who didn't waste time on false alarms. Mrs. Baxter, Dr. Clements called ahead. He's on his way here now, but he wanted us to start blood work immediately. Dr. Farrell knelt down to Emma's level. Hi there, sweetheart. We're going to do some quick tests to make sure you're feeling okay. I feel fine, Emma said, but she allowed herself to be led to a triage bed. The triage nurse, Janet Collier, was a veteran with 25 years of experience. She'd seen everything the ER could throw at her, but when Dr. Farrell handed her the pill organizer to examine, Janet's face went completely white. The busy emergency room seemed to pause. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the constant beeping of monitors seemed to quiet as Janet opened the container and examined its contents under a magnifying light. Dear God, Janet whispered, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. Dr. Farrell, these aren't vitamins. Gerard felt his world tilt on its axis. What are they? Dr. Farrell took the container and examined it herself, her expression growing more grave by the second. These are digoxin tablets, disguised to look like children's vitamins. Someone has been systematically poisoning your daughter. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of blood tests for lines and carefully controlled medical procedures. Emma, thankfully, was stable, but the blood work confirmed everyone's worst fears. She had dangerous levels of digoxin in her system, a heart medication that could be fatal in the wrong dosages, especially for a child. Gerard sat in the family consultation room with Sally, both of them trying to process what they'd learned. Dr. Farrell had explained that someone had been giving Emma small, carefully calculated doses over time, enough to make her occasionally tired and nauseous, but not enough to cause immediate collapse. "Someone's been slowly poisoning our daughter for weeks," Sally said, her voice hollow. "The mild symptoms we thought were just growing pains or tiredness from school. The nausea she complained about after lunch," Gerard added. "We thought it was just cafeteria food." Stewart arrived at the hospital still wearing his work clothes, having driven straight from the office. His medical background had already kicked into overdrive, and he was coordinating with Dr. Farrell on Emma's treatment plan. "The good news is we caught it in time," Stewart explained to Gerard and Sally. "Digoxin poisoning is treatable if detected early. The bad news is that whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random, it was calculated, methodical." Detective Omar Ross from the city's Crimes Against Children unit arrived as Emma was being moved to a private room for overnight observation. Ross was a tall, imposing man with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much evil in his 20-year career. But he also had 2 daughters of his own, and cases involving children brought out his most determined side. "Mr. and Mrs. Baxter, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Detective Ross said as they settled into the family room. "Who has regular access to Emma's food, her belongings, her daily routine?" Gerard ran through the list. "Sally and I, obviously. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Wise. The school cafeteria staff. Her after-school babysitter, Francine Kemp. My mother-in-law, Minnie Herbert, who watches her some weekends." "What about Emma's father?" Detective Ross asked Sally directly. Gerard felt a flash of irritation. "I am her father. Biological father," Ross clarified gently. "I have to ask." Sally's expression darkened. "Eugene McNamara, my ex-husband, but he hasn't seen Emma in over 2 years. The court ordered supervised visitation only after the incident." Gerard knew some of the story, but Sally had never shared all the details of her first marriage. He knew Eugene had been controlling and emotionally abusive, and that the divorce had been bitter. What he didn't know was why the court had restricted Eugene's access to Emma. "What incident?" Detective Ross asked. Sally looked at Gerard, then back at the detective. "Eugene tried to kidnap Emma from her daycare 2 years ago. Said I was an unfit mother and that he was taking her somewhere safe. The police found them 6 hours later at a motel outside the city. Emma was terrified. Gerard felt anger building in his chest. In the 3 years he'd been married to Sally, Eugene had been nothing more than a distant shadow, an occasional angry phone call that Sally would handle privately, or a missed child support payment. Gerard had never considered him a real threat. "Since then, Eugene's been unstable," Sally continued. "He lost his job, started drinking heavily. The court requires any visits to be supervised at a family services center, but he hasn't shown up for one in 18 months. Detective Ross was taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Baxter, I need you to think carefully. Has Eugene had any contact with Emma recently? Any way he could have accessed her food or belongings?" "No, I don't think so. We've been careful about that." "What about indirect contact? Anyone who might be helping him?" Gerard's analytical mind was already working through the possibilities. "Detective, how would someone get access to prescription digoxin? That's not something you can just buy." "Good question. Eugene McNamara, what's his background?" Sally's face grew even paler. "He's a pharmaceutical sales representative, or was before he lost his job. He specialized in cardiac medications." The room fell silent. Detective Ross closed his notepad and stood up. "Mr. and Mrs. Baxter, I'm going to be honest with you. This is all the hallmarks of a very serious crime. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge has been systematically poisoning your daughter, likely as part of a larger plan. We need to move quickly. Stuart, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. Gerard, I think you and Sally need to consider the possibility that this isn't random. If Eugene has been planning something for 2 years, the poisoning might just be the beginning. Gerard looked at his wife, saw the fear in her eyes, and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Someone had tried to hurt Emma, his Emma, the little girl who called him daddy and drew him pictures of their family that he kept framed on his desk. Someone had been slowly poisoning her, making her sick, potentially planning something even worse. As he sat in that hospital room, watching his daughter sleep peacefully despite the 4 in her small arm, Gerard Baxter made a decision. The law would handle this their way, but Gerard would handle it his way. And his way wouldn't involve courts, lawyers, or second chances. Eugene McNamara had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 4. Uncovering the Truth. Over the next 3 days, while Emma recovered in the hospital under careful monitoring, Gerard threw himself into investigation mode. His background in financial analysis had taught him how to trace patterns, follow paper trails, and connect seemingly unrelated dots. Now, he was applying those skills to something far more personal and urgent. Detective Ross had been thorough, but was bound by legal procedures and bureaucratic red tape. Gerard had no such limitations. Working from Emma's hospital room during the day and from his home office at night, Gerard began building a comprehensive picture of Eugene McNamara's life over the past 2 years. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Eugene hadn't just been unstable. He'd been methodically planning something. Using his knowledge of database systems and his connections in the financial world, Gerard was able to trace Eugene's activities in ways the police couldn't immediately access. Eugene had been unemployed for 14 months, but his bank records showed regular small deposits from various pharmaceutical companies. Not salaries, but payments for consulting work. Gerard recognized the pattern. Eugene was selling information about drug inventory, shipment schedules, and security protocols to black market dealers. But more disturbing were Eugene's searches and purchases. Through a contact at a private investigation firm that Meridian Financial sometimes used for due diligence, Gerard obtained Eugene's internet history from the past 6 months. The searches painted a picture of a man obsessed with custody laws, parental rights, and increasingly, with ways to prove that Sally was an unfit mother. He's been planning to take Emma, Gerard told Sally on the 3rd night, showing her printed copies of Eugene's online activity. Look at these searches: how to prove mother mentally unstable, custody rights for fathers, temporary guardianship laws. Sally stared at the papers, her nursing background helping her understand the medical implications. The poisoning, he wasn't trying to kill her. He was trying to make her sick enough that it would look like I was neglecting her health. Exactly. And look at this. Gerard showed her a series of searches from 3 weeks ago. Symptoms of child neglect, reporting suspected abuse, emergency custody procedures. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Eugene had been slowly poisoning Emma with carefully measured doses of digoxin, causing symptoms that could be attributed to poor parenting, fatigue, nausea, difficulty concentrating in school. When the symptoms became serious enough, he would anonymously report Sally to Child Protective Services, then swoop in as the concerned biological father demanding custody. There's more, Gerard said grimly. He pulled out another set of documents. Eugene's been in contact with a lawyer who specializes in emergency custody cases, and he's rented an apartment in Colorado under a false name. Sally's hands were shaking. He was going to disappear with her. Not if I have anything to say about it. Detective Ross arrived the next morning with official confirmation of what Gerard had already discovered through his own channels. We've got enough evidence to arrest Eugene McNamara on charges of child endangerment and attempted kidnapping. There's just one problem. We can't find him. What do you mean? Sally asked. He's disappeared. Cleared out of his apartment 3 days ago, right around the time you discovered the pills. Someone tipped him off. Gerard felt a chill run down his spine. How could he have known? Detective Ross looked uncomfortable. We're investigating that. But Mr. Baxter, I need to ask, Who else knew about the discovery at the hospital? Gerard mentally reviewed everyone who had been present. The medical staff, Stewart themselves, and the babysitter, Francine Kemp. She called Sally asking if Emma was okay because Emma seemed tired during her last session. When was that? 2 days ago. Sally told her we were at the hospital running some tests. Detective Ross was already reaching for his phone. We need to bring in Francine Kemp for questioning. But when they arrived at Francine's address, they found another empty apartment. The landlord told them she'd given notice a week ago and moved out yesterday. This is bigger than we thought, Detective Ross said as they stood in the empty living room. Eugene didn't just have access to pharmaceutical supplies. He had inside help. Someone who could monitor Emma's daily routine. Someone trusted enough to be in your home. Gerard's analytical mind was working overtime. Francine's been our babysitter for 6 months. Sally found her through an agency that supposedly vetted their employees. I'm starting to think that agency might not be as legitimate as we believed, Sally said quietly. That evening, Gerard sat in Emma's hospital room while she slept, Sally having gone home to shower and bring back fresh clothes. Stewart had stopped by after work, and the two men sat in the dim room, discussing what they knew. Gerard, I've been thinking about this all day, Stewart said. I've seen a lot of cases in the ER, but this level of calculation is unusual. Eugene isn't just desperate, he's methodical. And if he's gone underground with help from others, he's not going to give up easily. What are you saying? I'm saying that even when the police find him, you need to be prepared for a long legal battle. And in the meantime, Emma's safety is at risk every day he's out there. Gerard looked at his sleeping daughter, her small chest rising and falling peacefully, the force still in her arm providing the antidote to the poison someone had been feeding her. In that moment, something hardened inside him. Stewart, you know I've never been a violent man. I know, but Emma is my daughter. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. And someone tried to steal her from me by slowly poisoning her. Stewart nodded slowly. The legal system isn't always justice, Gerard. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices. Gerard looked at his friend, recognizing something in Stewart's expression, the look of a man who had made difficult decisions before. Tell me about your time in the ER. What do you want to know? You didn't just treat patients, did you? In 15 years, you must have seen cases where the system failed, where bad people got away with hurting children. Stewart was quiet for a long moment. There were cases where we'd patch up a kid and send them home, knowing they'd be back in a few weeks. Cases where the evidence was there, but not strong enough for conviction. Cases where custody went to the wrong parent. What did you do? What I had to do. Gerard understood. Stewart hadn't just been a doctor. He'd been a guardian, someone who had taken matters into his own hands when the system failed to protect the innocent. Eugene McNamara made a mistake when he chose my family to terrorize, Gerard said quietly. He's about to learn that some people don't forgive, and they definitely don't forget. Chapter 5, The Network. While Emma continued her recovery, the digoxin levels in her system dropping daily, Gerard and Stewart began their own investigation into Eugene's network. What they discovered was more extensive and disturbing than either had imagined. Using Stewart's medical contacts and Gerard's financial analysis skills, they traced the fake babysitting agency that had placed Francine in their home. Heritage Home Care Services existed only on paper and online, but the company registration led them to a small office building in a rundown part of the city. It's a front, Gerard explained to Detective Ross when they met at the police station. The agency places babysitters in homes of divorced mothers, specifically targeting families where the ex-husband has lost custody. Then they gather intelligence for kidnapping attempts. Detective Ross spread out the documents Gerard had compiled. This is impressive work, Mr. Baxter. How did you get access to all this? I have friends in financial services. We know how to trace money and corporate connections. What Gerard didn't mention was that some of his methods weren't entirely legal. With Stewart's help, he'd hacked into email accounts, intercepted phone records, and used social engineering techniques to extract information from unwitting sources. The network they'd uncovered was shocking in its scope. Eugene wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger operation run by a man named Philip Skinner, a disbarred lawyer who specialized in helping divorced fathers circumvent custody laws through intimidation, fraud, and worse. Skinner's operation had been active for at least 3 years, with more than a dozen successful kidnappings disguised as legitimate custody disputes. The pattern was always the same: identify divorced mothers with stable new relationships, place infiltrators in their homes through fake service agencies, then systematically undermine the mother's credibility through manufactured evidence of neglect or abuse. They target women like Sally specifically, Gerard explained to Detective Ross. Single mothers who remarried, have stable jobs, and whose ex-husbands have lost custody. They make these women look unfit. Then the biological father swoops in as the hero. And if the biological father doesn't want to pay for the full service, they offer a cheaper option, like systematically poisoning the child to create evidence of medical neglect. Detective Ross closed the file. Mr. Baxter, this information is incredible, but I have to ask, how did you obtain some of these documents? Some of this looks like it came from private email accounts and phone records. Gerard met the detective's gaze steadily. I used the same techniques I used to investigate potential fraud in investment portfolios. All perfectly legal research methods. It wasn't entirely true, but Gerard had been careful to keep Stewart's involvement minimal and to ensure that any evidence they'd obtained illegally was backed up by information that could be legally acquired. That night, Gerard sat in his home office while Sally slept upstairs. Emma was finally home from the hospital, and they'd installed a sophisticated security system that Gerard had arranged through his company's corporate security contacts. But Gerard wasn't satisfied with defense. Eugene and his network had tried to destroy his family, and they were still out there, probably targeting other families. The police would eventually catch them, but that could take months or years. And in the meantime, how many other children would suffer? Gerard opened his laptop and began planning. His financial analysis background had taught him that every system had vulnerabilities. You just had to know where to look and how to exploit them. Philip Skinner's operation was extensive, but it was also a business. And businesses had cash flows, dependencies, and pressure points. Over the next week, while publicly cooperating with the police investigation, Gerard began systematically dismantling Skinner's network from the inside. He started with the financial infrastructure. Using techniques he'd learned for investigating corporate fraud, Gerard traced the money flows that kept Skinner's operation running. He identified the bank accounts, the shell companies, the property rentals, and the payment systems that allowed the network to function. Then he began to sabotage them. The first step was the fake agencies. Gerard anonymously reported Heritage Home Care Services and 3 other front companies to state licensing authorities, providing detailed evidence of fraud. Within 48 hours, all 4 agencies had their licenses revoked and their assets frozen. Next came the money. Gerard had discovered that Skinner was using cryptocurrency to pay his network of infiltrators and corrupt officials. Using advanced techniques he'd learned for tracking international money laundering, Gerard identified the digital wallets and began systematically disrupting the payment system. But the most important discovery came when Gerard hacked into Philip Skinner's personal email account. What he found there changed everything. Chapter 6: The Deeper Conspiracy. The emails in Philip Skinner's account revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond what Gerard had imagined. Skinner wasn't just running a custody manipulation scheme. He was part of a much larger operation that involved corrupt family court judges, falsified psychological evaluations, and a network of professionals who were systematically stealing children from protective mothers. Judge Francisco Morse had been taking payments to rule in favor of abusive fathers. Dr. Anna Mead, a court-appointed child psychologist, had been providing false evaluations that painted loving mothers as mentally unstable. Lawyer Nelson Sanford had been coaching abusive ex-husbands on how to manipulate the system. And at the center of it all was Philip Skinner coordinating everything like a criminal mastermind. Gerard printed out every email, every financial transaction, every piece of evidence he could find. But as he read through the communications, he realized something that made his blood boil. Emma wasn't Eugene's first target. Over the past 3 years, Eugene had participated in 4 other cases. for other families destroyed, for other children traumatized, for other mothers whose lives have been shattered by this network of corruption. One of the cases particularly caught Gerard's attention: the file on Stephanie Hunt, a nurse from Portland whose ex-husband had gained custody of their daughter through fabricated evidence of drug abuse. The emails showed that Stephanie had fought the decision, hired private investigators, and eventually uncovered part of the conspiracy. The last email about Stephanie Hunt was dated 6 months ago. The subject line read, "Problem solved permanently." Gerard's hands trembled as he clicked on the email. Philip Skinner's message to Eugene was brief. Stephanie Hunt will no longer be pursuing her appeals. Car accident last Tuesday. Very sad. These mountain roads can be so dangerous. Gerard stared at the screen, understanding the implication. They hadn't just stolen children. They had murdered anyone who got too close to exposing them. And now Gerard was getting close. He immediately called Stuart, despite the late hour. "Stuart, I need you to come over right now. And bring whatever you use to carry for protection when you worked late night ER shifts." "Gerard, what's wrong?" "I found something, and I think we're all in danger." Stuart arrived 30 minutes later, carrying a small duffel bag that Gerard suspected contained more than medical supplies. They sat in Gerard's home office while Sally and Emma slept upstairs, and Gerard shared what he discovered. "We need to go to the police with this immediately," Stuart said after reading through the evidence. "With what? Illegally obtained emails that would be thrown out of court? Information gathered through computer hacking? Stuart, even if this evidence was admissible, it would take years to prosecute everyone involved. Judge Morse is still on the bench making custody decisions. Dr. Mead is still evaluating families. And while we're waiting for justice, how many more children are going to suffer?" Stuart was quiet for a long moment. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we handle this the way it should be handled. Quickly, efficiently, and permanently." "Gerard, you're talking about taking the law into your own hands. I'm talking about protecting my family and making sure these people never hurt another child." Stuart looked at his friend, recognizing the cold determination in Gerard's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in his own mirror years ago, when a legal system had failed a child who'd come through his ER doors one too many times. "What do you need me to do?" Gerard smiled for the first time in days, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I need you to help me plan the most comprehensive takedown these people have ever seen. By the time we're finished, Philip Skinner's network is going to wish they'd never heard the name Emma Baxter." The two men spent the rest of the night planning. Gerard's analytical mind mapped out every connection, every vulnerability, every pressure point in network. Stuart's medical knowledge provided insights into methods and timing. Together, they designed a plan that would systematically destroy everyone involved while ensuring that Gerard's family remained safe. But as dawn broke over the city, Gerard realized they had one more problem to solve. Eugene McNamara was still out there, still free, and according to the emails Gerard had intercepted, he was planning one final desperate attempt to take Emma. The emails indicated that Eugene blamed Gerard for stealing his family and was no longer content with legal manipulation. He was planning something direct, something violent, and something that would happen soon. Gerard closed his laptop and looked at Stuart. "Change of plans. We're not just taking down the network. We're going to use it to trap Eugene first." "Ow!" Gerard's smile was sharp and cold. "We're going to give him exactly what he wants. We're going to make him think he's won." Chapter 7. The Trap. 2 weeks later, Gerard and Sally put their plan into motion. To the outside world, it appeared that the stress of Emma's poisoning and the police investigation had taken its toll on their marriage. They began arguing publicly, loudly enough for neighbors to hear. Gerard moved into a hotel temporarily, making sure to complain to anyone who would listen about Sally's overprotectiveness and paranoia. The performance was designed to reach Eugene through the network of informants that Gerard had identified in Philip Skinner's emails. Within days, word had spread through the underground channels that the Baxter family was fracturing. Meanwhile, Detective Ross was working with federal authorities to build cases against Judge Morse and Dr. Mead based on the evidence Gerard had provided. But Gerard had been careful to present it as information discovered through his financial investigation techniques, leaving out the illegal hacking. The real plan was much more sophisticated. Gerard had spent 2 weeks studying Eugene's psychological profile, built from their surveillance of his communications, his spending patterns, and his behavior history. Eugene was narcissistic, impulsive, and believed himself smarter than everyone around him. Most importantly, he was impatient. The fake marital problems were designed to make Eugene think his opportunity had finally arrived. If Gerard and Sally were fighting, if their marriage was unstable, if Sally appeared overwhelmed and distracted, then Eugene could position himself as the stable alternative parent. Gerard's move to the Riverside Hotel wasn't random. The hotel was located exactly 12 minutes from Emma's school and had security cameras covering every entrance. More importantly, Gerard had spent a week befriending the hotel staff and arranging for additional surveillance that Eugene wouldn't detect. On a Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Gerard had moved into the hotel, Eugene made his move. Gerard was sitting in the hotel restaurant, openly drinking and appearing disheveled, when Stuart called. "He's taken the bait. Black Ford Explorer, license plate matching the description you provided. He's been sitting across from Emma's school for the past hour." Gerard felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. "Is everyone in position? Detective Ross and his team are 2 blocks away. The school has been notified. Sally's inside with Emma, and they're ready to move to the safe room if needed. And our backup plan?" Stuart's voice was grim. "Ready if the police plan fails." Gerard had learned from Stephanie Hunt's case that legal justice wasn't always guaranteed. If Eugene somehow escaped police custody or the charges didn't stick, Gerard was prepared to implement a more permanent solution. At 3:15 p.m., as children began filing out of Pine Ridge Elementary, Eugene McNamara stepped out of his vehicle. He was carrying a bouquet of flowers and walking toward the school entrance with the confident stride of a man who believed he was finally getting what he deserved. He made it exactly 50 feet before Detective Ross and 4 officers surrounded him. But as Gerard watched from his hotel room through binoculars, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Eugene wasn't surprised by the arrest. He was smiling. Gerard's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Mr. Baxter." The voice was cultured, confident, and completely unfamiliar. "This is Philip Skinner. I believe we need to talk." Chapter 8. Face to Face. The meeting location was neutral ground, a public park near downtown, with plenty of witnesses and escape routes. Gerard arrived early, positioning himself on a bench with clear sight lines in all directions. Stuart was 50 yards away, pretending to jog, with a clear view of the entire area. Philip Skinner arrived exactly on time. He was a small, well-dressed man in his 50s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to being the smartest person in the room. He sat down next to Gerard, as if they were old friends meeting for a casual conversation. "Mr. Baxter, you've been busy," Skinner said without preamble. "Impressive work, really. The way you traced our financial networks, identified our operational structure, even managed to provide the police with evidence while covering your own illegal methods. Quite sophisticated." Gerard kept his expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Skinner laughed. "Please, I know you hack my emails. I know you've been systematically sabotaging my operation for the past 2 weeks. And I know you're responsible for the federal investigation that's currently dismantling 3 years of careful work. If you know all that, why are you here instead of running?" "Because, Mr. Baxter, you've made a fundamental error in judgment. You've assumed that arresting Eugene would end this. But Eugene was just an employee, a desperate, unstable employee who was always destined to be caught eventually." Gerard felt ice forming in his stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your daughter is still in danger. You've disrupted my network, yes, but you haven't eliminated the demand for my services. There are dozens of men like Eugene out there, and they're willing to pay handsomely for results." Skinner reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tablet. On the screen was a live video feed of Emma's classroom at Pine Ridge Elementary. "Ow! Did you really think we only had one person inside your circle?" Francine was obvious, meant to be discovered. She was never the real threat. Gerard's mind raced through the possibilities. Who else had access to Emma? Who else had they trusted? "Mrs. Wise," Gerard said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Emma's teacher, Kara Wise, has been feeding us information about your family for 4 months, Mr. Baxter. She knows Emma's schedule, her habits, her fears. She's been preparing Emma psychologically for the transition to her real daddy. Gerard's hands clenched into fists. What do you want? I want you to understand that this isn't over. Arresting Eugene was a temporary setback, but the demand for our services hasn't decreased. In fact, your interference has made Emma a particularly valuable target. Other clients see her as a challenge, a proof of concept. You're threatening my daughter. I'm explaining reality. You can continue your crusade against my network, and we'll continue to adapt and evolve. Meanwhile, Emma remains at risk every day she's in that school, every moment she's out of your sight. Skinner stood up to leave, but Gerard grabbed his arm. Wait, what would it take for this to end? What would make you leave my family alone? Skinner smiled coldly. Nothing you'd be willing to do, Mr. Baxter. You're a good man, a law-abiding citizen. You work within the system. But the system can't protect Emma from people like me. Try me. Skinner studied Gerard's face carefully. There might be one way, but it would require you to become something you're not. Something your wife might not recognize. Explain. My operation succeeds because it's invisible. We operate in shadows. We corrupt systems from within, and we disappear when threatened. But what if someone with your skills, your financial expertise, your analytical mind, your insider access to legitimate institutions? What if someone like that decided to build a competing network? Gerard stared at him. You want me to join you? I want you to replace me. Take over my operation, redirect it toward legitimate custody cases, help fathers who actually deserve their children instead of abusers and kidnappers. Clean house from the inside. And if I refuse, then Emma remains a target. Not just from Eugene, from every desperate father who sees her as the prize that proves our methods work. Skinner walked away, leaving Gerard alone on the bench with a terrible choice. Join the network that had tried to destroy his family, or spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, knowing that his daughter would never be truly safe. That evening, Gerard explained the situation to Sally and Stuart. They sat in their living room, Emma safely asleep upstairs, while Gerard outlined Skinner's proposal. He's right about one thing, Stuart said grimly. As long as the demand exists, someone will fill it. Taking down Skinner just creates a power vacuum. But joining them? Sally was horrified. Gerard, these people try to kill our daughter, and they'll try again unless we control the situation. Sally, if I take over Skinner's network, I can dismantle it from the inside. I can protect Emma and help other families at the same time. Or you could become the very thing you're fighting against. Gerard looked at his wife, understanding her fear. But he also understood something else. Sometimes good people had to make impossible choices to protect what mattered most. There's another option, Stuart said quietly. One that doesn't involve joining them or waiting for them to strike again. What? Stuart's expression was calm, but his eyes were hard. We end this permanently. All of them. Tonight. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. Gerard had spent weeks mapping Philip Skinner's network, identifying every player, every location, and every vulnerability. Now he would use that knowledge to orchestrate their downfall. Stuart's medical background provided the key insight. Skinner's operation depends on coordination and communication. Take out the communication network, and the whole system collapses. They started with Mrs. Kara Wise, Emma's teacher who had been feeding information to the network. Gerard had discovered that she was deeply in debt due to her gambling addiction, debts that Skinner had been paying in exchange for her cooperation. Rather than expose her immediately, Gerard offered her a choice during a private meeting after school hours. Mrs. Wise, I know about your arrangement with Philip Skinner, Gerard said, sitting across from her in her empty classroom. I also know about your gambling debts, your financial situation, and the hold Skinner has over you. Kara Wise had always been a nervous woman, but now she looked terrified. Mr. Baxter, I never meant for Emma to get hurt. I just provided information about schedules and routines. I didn't know they were going to poison her. But you suspected something was wrong, didn't you? You noticed Emma's symptoms getting worse. Tears began flowing down her face. I thought maybe she was just tired. Kids get tired. I didn't know. Gerard leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Philip Skinner and tell him that I've agreed to meet with him tonight. You're going to give him the address I specify, and you're going to convince him that I'm ready to negotiate. And if I refuse? Gerard placed a manila folder on the desk between them. Then Detective Ross receives this complete documentation of your involvement in child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. You'll lose your teaching license, face criminal charges, and still owe money to some very dangerous people. And if I cooperate, then you disappear. Tonight, I've arranged for debt forgiveness and a teaching position in Oregon under a new identity. You start over. You never contact anyone from your old life, and you spend the rest of your career actually protecting children instead of helping people hurt them. Kara Wise stared at the folder, then at Gerard. Why are you offering me this? Because unlike Skinner and his people, I don't believe in destroying people who were manipulated into bad situations. But this is your only chance, Mrs. Wise. Take it or face the consequences. An hour later, Kara Wise made the phone call to Philip Skinner, reading from a script Gerard had provided. The meeting was set for 11 p.m. at an abandoned warehouse that Gerard had selected specifically for its isolation and its security camera blind spots. While Kara Wise boarded a bus to Oregon with a new ID and a fresh start, Gerard and Stewart prepared for the most dangerous part of their plan. You know, this could go very wrong, Stewart said as they checked their equipment in Gerard's garage. Skinner's not stupid. He might suspect a trap. He'll suspect a trap, but his ego won't let him believe I could outsmart him. Men like Skinner think they're always the smartest person in the room. Gerard's preparation was meticulous. He'd studied Skinner's psychological profile, his business methods, and his operational patterns. Skinner was a controller who relied on manipulation and intimidation, but he was also a coward who had never faced direct physical confrontation. The warehouse Gerard had chosen was one that Meridian Financial had used for storage before moving to a larger facility. Gerard knew the layout intimately, had keys to all the entrances, and had spent the past week installing his own surveillance and communication equipment. At 10:45 p.m., Gerard was in position inside the warehouse, monitoring the approaches through hidden cameras. Stewart was positioned outside with a rifle and a clear line of sight to the main entrance, backup in case things went wrong. Philip Skinner arrived exactly on time, but he didn't come alone. 3 men accompanied him, all carrying weapons and moving with the practiced confidence of professional criminals. Gerard's earpiece crackled with Stewart's voice, for targets, all armed. This isn't a negotiation, it's an execution. Gerard had expected this. Skinner had never intended to negotiate. He'd come to eliminate the threat Gerard represented, just as he'd eliminated Stephanie Hunt. But Gerard had been planning for this scenario. Phase 2, Gerard whispered into his microphone. The warehouse suddenly filled with blinding light as Gerard activated the high-power construction lights he'd installed throughout the space. At the same time, speakers hidden in the rafters began broadcasting a deafeningly loud alarm sound. Skinner and his men were temporarily disoriented, exactly as Gerard had planned. But Gerard had spent weeks practicing in this space with the lights and noise, and he moved through the warehouse like a ghost. The first man went down to a taser Gerard had modified for extended range. The second fell into a pit Gerard had covered with a tarp, landing 12 feet down on concrete. Skinner and the remaining gunmen took cover behind some old equipment, trying to locate Gerard in the chaos of lights and sound. Baxter, Skinner shouted over the noise. You're making a mistake. You can't win this. We have people everywhere. Gerard's voice seemed to come from all directions, amplified by the speaker system. You're right, Skinner. I can't win this through legal channels. But I don't need legal channels. I just need you. The psychological warfare was deliberate. Gerard wanted Skinner afraid, confused, and making mistakes. The turning point came when Stewart's voice crackled through Gerard's earpiece. Gerard, you need to know. Emma's school just called Sally. There's been an incident. Someone tried to break into the building tonight. Gerard felt ice in his veins. This wasn't Skinner's only play. It was a distraction. While Gerard was focused on the warehouse confrontation, Another team was going after Emma directly. "Stuart, get to my house now. Sally and Emma are supposed to be at your apartment. But if someone's at the school..." Gerard's planning shifted into overdrive. He activated the final phase of his warehouse trap, automated systems that would contain Skinner and his remaining man until police arrived, triggered by Gerard's remote signal. But first, he had to deal with the immediate threat. Gerard emerged from the shadows, no longer hiding, no longer playing games. In his hand was a pistol he'd acquired through Stuart's contacts, and his expression was completely calm. "Philip Skinner," Gerard said, his voice cutting through the alarm noise. "You have 10 seconds to call off whatever team you sent to my home, or I start shooting." Chapter 9. Justice Served. The standoff in the warehouse lasted exactly 43 seconds. Philip Skinner, faced with Gerard's unwavering resolve and the realization that his distraction tactic had been discovered, made the call to abort the home invasion. But Gerard wasn't satisfied with just stopping the immediate threat. "Now you're going to call every person in your network and tell them the operation is permanently shut down," Gerard said, keeping the pistol trained on Skinner. "You're going to transfer control of all financial accounts to a foundation I've established for protecting abused children. And you're going to provide testimony against every corrupt official you've been paying. And if I refuse..." Gerard's smile was arctic. "Then you'll join Stephanie Hunt." Skinner's confident facade finally cracked. "You can't prove anything about Stephanie Hunt. I don't need to prove it to a court. I just need to prove it to the people who cared about her." Gerard activated his phone speaker and placed a call. The voice that answered was female, young, and angry. "Is this?" And the voice asked. "This is Philip Skinner," Gerard confirmed. "The man responsible for your mother's death." Skinner's face went white as he recognized the implications. Gerard had contacted Stephanie Hunt's daughter, now 18 and legally an adult, and provided her with the evidence of Skinner's involvement in her mother's murder. "Mr. Skinner," the young woman's voice was steady despite her obvious emotion, "my name is Jennifer Hunt. You killed my mother to cover up your criminal operation. I've been waiting 2 years to find the people responsible. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything. I have money, I have time, and I have nothing left to lose. If Mr. Baxter doesn't get justice for my mother, I will. And I won't be as civilized about it as he's being." The psychological pressure was overwhelming. Skinner found himself trapped between Gerard's immediate physical threat, the legal consequences of Gerard's evidence, and the promise of long-term vengeance from Stephanie Hunt's daughter. He broke. Over the next hour, Skinner provided detailed confessions about his entire operation. He gave up the names of every corrupt official, every infiltrator, every client who had paid for children to be stolen from their mothers. He transferred control of his financial assets to Gerard's foundation and provided passwords to encrypted communications that would allow authorities to unravel 3 years of criminal activity. When Detective Ross arrived with backup officers, they found Philip Skinner and his associates secured and ready for transport, along with a comprehensive package of evidence that would ensure convictions for everyone involved. But Gerard's justice went beyond legal consequences. Over the following weeks, as news of the conspiracy broke nationwide, Gerard used his financial expertise and the resources he'd seized from Skinner's operation to implement a different kind of punishment. Judge Francisco Morse found his personal investments wiped out overnight, his pension fund emptied through carefully orchestrated financial manipulation. Dr. Anami discovered that her professional licenses had been revoked in every state due to anonymous reports of ethical violations backed by meticulous documentation. Lawyer Nelson Sanford's practice collapsed when his client list was leaked to authorities, revealing his involvement in dozens of fraudulent custody cases. Eugene McNamara, facing federal charges for child endangerment and conspiracy, found that his legal troubles were the least of his problems. Gerard had systematically destroyed his ability to function in society, his credit destroyed, his employment prospects eliminated, his reputation ruined in every community where he might try to start over. But Gerard's masterpiece was what he did with Philip Skinner's assets. The Stephanie Hunt Foundation, established with money seized from Skinner's operation, became a national organization dedicated to protecting mothers and children from custody manipulation. Within 6 months, it had helped reunite 12 families that had been destroyed by Skinner's network and provided legal support for dozens more. Eugene served 4 years in federal prison. When he was released, he found a world where Gerard Baxter's influence made it impossible for him to rebuild his life. Every job application was rejected, every apartment rental denied, every attempt to start fresh blocked by the comprehensive blacklisting Gerard had arranged. 5 years later, Gerard sat in his home office, reviewing quarterly reports for the foundation that had grown into a multi-million-dollar organization. Emma, now 12 years old, was doing homework at the kitchen table, healthy, happy, and completely unaware of how close she'd come to being stolen from the family that loved her. Sally appeared in the doorway with coffee for both of them. "The Hunt Foundation just got approval for the new legislation," she said, settling into the chair across from Gerard's desk. "Mandatory psychological evaluations for all family court personnel, enhanced background checks for child care providers, and federal oversight of custody decisions in domestic abuse cases." Gerard smiled, remembering the terrified little girl in the hospital bed with an 4-drip flushing poison from her system. That experience had taught him that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought in courtrooms or through official channels. Sometimes justice required good people to become something harder, something more dangerous than the threats they faced. "Any word on Eugene?" Gerard asked. "He was arrested again last week. Attempted burglary in Nevada. 3rd strike. He's looking at life under their 3 strikes law." Gerard nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction. Eugene McNamara had spent 5 years learning that there were consequences for threatening Gerard Baxter's family. Now he would spend the rest of his life remembering that lesson. Emma's laughter drifted in from the kitchen as she worked on her math homework, the sound of a child who felt safe and loved in her home. Gerard closed the foundation reports and walked into the kitchen, where his daughter was waiting for help with fractions. As he sat down beside her, Emma looked up with the bright smile that had made him a father the day he'd married Sally. "Daddy, Mrs. Johnson says I'm the best at math in my whole class." "That's because you're brilliant, sweetheart, just like your mom." Gerard helped Emma with her homework, listened to her stories about her friends, and tucked her into bed with the usual routine of stories and songs. To any observer, he was simply a devoted father enjoying a quiet evening with his family. But Gerard Baxter was more than that now. He was a protector, a guardian who had learned that sometimes love required darkness, that sometimes justice required methods the law couldn't sanction. Philip Skinner's network was gone. Eugene McNamara was destroyed, and Emma Baxter was safe. For Gerard, that was victory enough. But in his home office, locked in a safe that only he could access, Gerard kept detailed files on dozens of other cases.